Today's story involves the Andrew family, Mother Brenda, Father Robert, and their two children, Tri-City and Parker. Before they became a family, the story begins with Brenda and Robert as individuals. So let me introduce you to Brenda Evers before she became Brenda Andrew. Brenda was born and raised in Enid, Oklahoma, to Donald and Rose May Evers. They were both devout Lutherans. Donald served in the U.S. Navy during the Korean War from 1953 to 1957, and then he married Rose in 1958 at Trinity Methodist Church. Enid, Oklahoma, is in the northwest. It's about an hour and a half away from Oklahoma City. It's actually known as the wheat capital of the United States. I wouldn't necessarily call it a super small town like some of the other ones that I've talked about, because there were about 40,000 people living there at the time. But it was small compared to other parts of Oklahoma, so I'm still going to give it that small town label, if you will. The Evers were a middle-class family. Don worked at the Garfield County Courthouse, and Rose worked as an administrative assistant for a local lumber company called Long Bell Lumber Company. Eventually, Rose decided to quit to become a stay-at-home mom when the Evers' first child, Kimberly Dawn, was born on September 16, 1961. Just over 3 years later, Brenda was born on December 16, 1963. The Evers also had a son, John J., who was sadly described by the family as severely mentally impaired. Both Kimberly and Brenda helped Rose with their brother John, and the Evers were unconditionally loving to those around them, in part because of how dedicated they were to their Lutheran faith, unwavering in their devotion to the church, helping others, holding regular prayer groups in their home, and gathering for family meals. Brenda was shy. She was cute, petite, and a quiet little girl who was always meticulously and modestly dressed with her clothing buttoned all the way up. She was dedicated to getting above-average grades in school, attending church throughout the week, and spending most of her time helping care for her brother John. People who knew the Evers described them as stepping right out of a 1950s sitcom. Brenda's close friend, Eileen Zander Littlefield, spent a lot of time with the Evers and came from a similar upbringing, the type of household that valued the image they portrayed to everyone around them. Even Eileen noticed that Brenda was different from the other kids. She was not interested in talking about boys, but preferred to focus on playing the trumpet and doing well in school. She was one of the only friends in their friend group who got straight A's. Brenda respected her parents and followed in her mother's footsteps, acquiring skills in cooking and sewing, which did not help to widen her social circle. Many of her friends thought that she was a little bit odd. However, Brenda was a good friend. She loved to help others and was always the first one to offer her assistance, so it was easy to count on her. Brenda was part of the church choir and went to a Lutheran grade school. She was involved in a lot of youth group activities. The Evers sisters were members of ongoing Ambassadors for Christ, an evangelism program for teens, and they also worked at a Lutheran summer camp. When she got into middle school, Brenda's mother allowed her to enroll in a baton twirling class when she was in 7th grade. These classes were held at the Twirling Academy every Wednesday night at 6 p.m., and she was part of a twirling group of about 10 other girls her age. Brenda's mom let her do this because it was a safe and wholesome sport and allowed Brenda to be a part of what other kids her age were doing, like going to football games, without getting into trouble. Unlike everyone else, when the game was over, Brenda would go straight home. Even as she got older and into high school, this remained her routine. She would go out to the football games, twirl her baton, or play trumpet in the band, but never go out to the parties with the other kids afterward. She didn't drink, and she never smoked or did anything like that. She was very conservative, and it was clear to everyone around her. She conformed to what her parents believed was expected of a young girl her age. It wasn't just that, though. Brenda was taught to be quiet and private because of her brother John's condition. It made Kimberly and Brenda strong individuals, but they were taught to be careful and guarded. I think there might have been a stigma of some kind about children who were different back then, which is actually very unfortunate and sad. Keeping up appearances could have been important to the Evers. Rose was involved in the Lutheran Women's Missionary League, as well as other Lutheran social and charitable groups that were associated with her church community. So I am sure that she had a reputation to uphold when it came to her family. In 1977, when Brenda was around 15, Rose went back to work as a church secretary for Redeemer Lutheran Church. So not only was the Everses' religion a part of their daily lives, but it was also part of Rose's work life and career. It was when Brenda was a senior at Chisholm High School that she met Robert Andrew for the first time. To understand what drew these two together and how they became a couple, I have to introduce you to Robert. Robert Dale Andrew was also born and raised in Enid, Oklahoma. He was born on September 19, 1962, to his father, Eugene Russell Andrew, who went by his initials, E.R., and his mother, Llewellyn Andrew. E.R. and Llewellyn had children back-to-back, except their youngest child, Tom, who came about 8 or 9 years after Robert. The first was Bill, then a couple of years later, Tim, followed by Robert, their third child, and later, younger brother Tom. Robert grew up in a very wholesome family with strong family values. He had a happy childhood, but it wasn't without stumbling blocks. However, he could lean on his older brothers and his family for support. They were a very close family. It's nice having siblings that are not too far apart in age because you can enjoy things together. Even Robert's younger brother Tom enjoyed skiing and hanging out with his older brothers. E.R. and Llewellyn raised their boys into fine gentlemen. However, when Robert was a child, he wasn't as athletically inclined as his older brothers. It was almost like his body was fighting against him. He was awkward and hid that with his humor and creativity. The physical struggle began with his eyesight, which made sports somewhat of an issue. You can't keep your eye on the ball if one of your eyes wanders. That can be a problem. Depth perception was a real issue for Rob, so he ended up having to get glasses and do special eye exercises. He was able to gain control over that eye. I'm kind of surprised he wasn't offered some kind of surgery. Maybe back then this was the route that doctors took because it was less risky. I'm not sure, but I've seen people with a wandering eye get surgery or have a patch over one eye to build strength over the years. Struggling with this physical obstacle, Rob built other qualities about himself, and these qualities would make him successful in his future. Short stories, telling jokes, and having his entire family laughing out loud at the dinner table, Robert developed a great personality. It's better to have a great personality and be physically attractive than to just be physically attractive alone. If you know you're not so fortunate in the looks department, it's a really good quality to have to be funny and personable and be able to command a room. Robert actually attended the same high school as Brenda. However, he was a year older. After graduating, he attended Oklahoma State University and was studying for a degree in advertising and marketing. It was while he was a student there that he met Brenda, who was still, as I said, a senior in high school at the time. Brenda knew Robert's younger brother Thomas, and Brenda had grown up a lot since the last time I talked about her back when she was in middle school, twirling her baton and playing the trumpet. By this time, she was turning the heads of every guy in her small town, but there was one guy she kept asking Thomas about, his older brother, Robert. Tom had to help his big bro out and let him know there's this really cute girl who comes to the community pool in town. He said next time you're home, you two should meet, and they did. I would say it was love at first sight, but really, Robert was smitten by Brenda's beauty. He thought Brenda was absolutely stunning. He couldn't keep his eyes off of her. Rob would later tell friends that he was at the community pool during the summer. He looked over and saw Brenda in her swimsuit, and she looked so good that he couldn't help but approach her. Brenda was only 19 at the time. Rob lived about an hour and a half away because he was attending Oklahoma State, but they did start seeing each other and eventually became exclusive. After graduating high school, Brenda moved away to attend St. John's Lutheran College in Winfield, Kansas, but a year later, she transferred to Oklahoma State University to be closer to Rob. He was serious about his studies and spent his time working on various school projects. Rob wrote for the university newspaper, the local Legion, and was also actively involved in OSU's advertising club. In 1984, Robert graduated with a degree in advertising and marketing, and that same year he proposed to Brenda, and of course she said yes. Robert had a similar wholesome upbringing as Brenda. He was intelligent, funny, good-looking, and he had just graduated with a degree. He was planning to go into a lucrative advertising career. It was all the qualities that someone like Brenda was looking for in a guy that she knew her parents would approve of. Besides, they were inseparable. They seemed to be the perfect couple, especially based on the way that they both grew up and their belief systems. Brenda just really thought that Rob was husband material, someone that she could start a family with. So, after they both graduated, they lived in Oklahoma City and got married on June 2nd, 1984. Brenda was interested in a career in finance, while Rob was actively looking to break into the advertising industry. He was offered a job at an advertising company in Texas, so he and Brenda relocated there. Brenda ended up finding a job that she really liked. Things were going well for the couple. Rob was excelling at work. Brenda had made some really solid friendships in town, and she loved life away from the Bible Belt. She was living in a place with good old Southern hospitality. It was a nice change for her. It was exciting and enabled her to be her own person aside from her family. I've experienced this. I don't know if you have, but you become your own person when you step away from your parents. Especially if you have parents like Brenda's, who kind of kept her in her own little shell, in her own little bubble. Back in her hometown, everyone knew her, and probably expected her to act a certain way and be a certain way because of her past and upbringing. But as an adult, getting away and being on your own to become your own version of yourself can be very empowering. It was as though Brenda was really coming into her own and feeling independent. Brenda and Rob were about to go through their first struggle as a couple. It wasn't something they couldn't figure out. I mention this because many times when we see shows about cases or we read about them, we only hear about the good things. I think we all know that no relationship is perfect. Let me explain. Just as they were putting down roots in Texas for the last couple of years, Rob admitted to Brenda that he missed being back home. He dreamed of working for a very prominent advertising firm back in Oklahoma City called Jordan Advertising Associates. Their client list included his alumni, Oklahoma State, as well as energy giant ONAC. The position he wanted was a high-paying one with a lot of room to grow, but Brenda wasn't thrilled. She was happy and content. She was growing. However, Rob wasn't even offered this position yet. He would call her regularly to talk to the president and CEO, Jeanette Gamba, to ask whether there were any openings, but no such luck. However, Brenda knew that it would be a possibility, and she wasn't exactly hoping it would happen. But it did happen in 1988. After 2 years of checking in with Jeanette, she finally informed Rob that they had a position to offer him. It was an exciting time. This was his dream. He had worked so hard to get here, and it was all coming together. Except it wasn't. Brenda couldn't leave. Instead of making it into more of an issue, they made a compromise. Rob didn't even know if he was going to like this job or if he was going to like being back in Oklahoma. So Brenda would stay in Texas while Rob moved back to Oklahoma until he knew for sure that this was what he wanted and what was best for the couple. So, the pair lived apart for a few months until Rob made the decision to stay at Jordan. He relayed all the positives to Brenda, which included being close to their families, and they planned to start their own. It made sense for them to move back, and Brenda agreed. It was hard for people to disagree with Rob. He was always so good at making sense of things. There was something so extraordinary about Rob that drew people to him and made them love and respect him. It wasn't just his hard work, intelligence, or sense of humor. It was the principles that drove him to be who he was. Getting to know Rob and his family through this research changed me as a person because it taught me something that he shared with so many others: hope and persistence. It sounds ordinary, but what made these lessons unique was where they came from for Rob. 2 books that he kept in his desk drawer at his office. You may be familiar with one or both of them. The first one I remember from my childhood, Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham. This is what I thought made Rob unique and taught me something that I had not heard before. Rob considered it to be the best business book in the world, because by the end of the book, he persuades a gourmet chef to sample green eggs and ham, and eventually like it. This book taught Rob the value of persistence. The other book was the Bible, which he studied every morning before work. He even kept a prayer journal and used it as a place to record his thoughts, Bible scriptures, and his intentions and interpretations of how these things related to his life. This is what instilled the message of hope in Rob. His devotion to God and picking up his Bible again in the way he was did not happen until later, and you'll find out why in just a moment. After settling back down in Oklahoma City, Brenda landed a job at the Bank of Oklahoma and rose up through the ranks to become a personal banker. Brenda wasn't just beautiful. She was intelligent, hardworking, and enjoyed being social with her co-workers. She made a number of close friends at the bank. A lot of times, she and Rob would go out on double dates with other couples. Brenda had gained a lot of confidence over the years. She had come out of her shell, and maybe it was because of Rob's outgoing personality that rubbed off on her. But she was not the shy little girl with the clothes all buttoned up to her neck. She had blossomed into a very gorgeous, kind, fun to be around, and sexy woman. She stood out in a crowd. There was something about Brenda, a twinkle in her eye, or her big, perfect, pearly smile. She had charisma. She looked like the girl next door, but all grown up, and Rob considered himself so lucky. He really was, because he had everything he had always wished for. Just like Brenda, Rob loved his job. It was his dream job. Rob came to work every morning with gratefulness in his heart. He was always the first one to get to his office. He was extremely friendly, outgoing, and very creative, the traits I told you he cultivated growing up that would serve him well in his future. Robert was always cracking jokes and making people smile. He had the best laugh, an infectious laugh, the type that makes it nearly impossible to hold back your own laugh. Rob even did things like bringing a bunch of Slurpees to work for everyone, because he decided July 11th would be 7-Eleven Day. Many people who worked with Rob saw him as a mentor. He was always coming up with really cool ideas. He would rush into the office, scribble something down on a piece of paper, and then tape it onto the walls to come up with an advertising plan. He made work fun, and clients loved him. He would take potential clients out for drinks and dinner, ultimately winning them over with his personality and creativity. Over the years, this would elevate him to Senior Vice President of Jordan Associates. But before that, there was another life-changing event that occurred on December 23, 1990. After 6 years of marriage, Brenda and Rob welcomed their first child into this world. Rob chose her name, and it's a unique one. I had to practice it a few times because I had never actually heard it used as a name before. Her name is Tri-City. Yes, not Trinity, one-letter difference, Tri-City. He thought it would be cool if one day his daughter were to run for public office and make signs that said electricity. Yes, it's true, there's Rob's dad humor for you. But it stuck. It is pretty cool if you ask me. Like, I have a unique name myself, and I'm sure many people had trouble pronouncing her name, considering it also looks like Tri-City, referring to the Tri-City area in different states. But no matter what, they named her Tri-City. She was an absolute joy to the Andrew family. Brenda loved children. After all, she did spend most of her childhood caring for her brother. It was in her blood. It was who she was. Brenda's sister Kim became a nurse, probably for the same reason. The Andrews were her family now, and Rob was a natural family man, having grown up with 3 brothers of his own. Brenda and Rob were active in their community in the church they attended, called Village Baptist Church. Brenda would even help out with the Sunday school classes. After Tri-City was born, Brenda quit her job and became a stay-at-home mom. It might have been the fact that both Rob and Brenda's mothers did the same. They were very attentive to their children, and Brenda felt the pressure to follow in their footsteps and stay at home with her child as well. She could have thought that this would give her the best life possible. Plus, financially, Rob was in a position to support their entire family on his own and provide them with a very comfortable lifestyle, including the ability to purchase a home in an upscale suburban neighborhood of Landsbrook in Oklahoma City. According to Landsbrook.org, It's a welcoming, family-friendly neighborhood with a lot of charm. In addition to a lake, it has 4 parks with playgrounds, walking trails, a large pool, a tennis court, and security. There are several social events each week to ensure the continued development of new friendships and pride in the neighborhood. It was the perfect place for the Andrew family to grow. It was beautiful, with lots of kids having fun at the community pool, barbecues, and events at the clubhouse, smiling children at those parks I just talked about. It was a great way for moms who were at home with their children to socialize. And that's exactly what Brenda did. It's an estate that consists of 180 acres, around 400 single-family homes, duplexes, and beautiful landscaping. The Andrew home had 3 bedrooms, 3.5 bathrooms, and was close to 4,000 square feet on a 6,050 square foot lot. If you've been here before, you know I'm probably going to find pictures, and here they are. It's got a 2-car garage, a nice big beautiful front yard. I love the little stone walkway that goes from the driveway to the front door. Hardwood floors, a beautiful fireplace in the sitting room, a nice big kitchen for family meals, and it's also a multi-level home. It has a big deck out in the back, perfect for entertaining guests, barbecuing, kids running around, and having a good time playing together. The rooms were very spacious. Look at the yard though. This really is what people dream about, the American dream, and the Andrew family was living it. It just hurts me to think that they've worked so hard to get here. Because, I'm sure you realize, we wouldn't be talking about this family if something terrible hadn't happened to them. Brenda traded in her 9-to-5 for changing diapers, bouncing her little bundle of joy on her knee, socializing with other moms at the park, grocery shopping, and putting those little home economic skills that she learned in high school to practice. She definitely was following in her mother's footsteps with cooking and sewing and being a full-time mom and wife. She was good at it too. She was devoted to her role. She would have delicious dinners made and ready for Rob as soon as he came through that door every evening from work. Rob worked a lot because he wanted to provide everything he could for his growing family, and it was growing because 4 years after Tri-City was born, they welcomed a son, Parker Bryce. Now the Andrew family was really complete, and we are back where I started with the story, with the family of 4, Brenda, Rob, Tri-City, and Parker. This is how they became the Andrew family. Brenda went from small-town girl to basically a super mom. She did it all. She was at the Girl Scout meeting, the bake sale fundraiser for the neighborhood, teaching the Sunday school classes, attending church regularly, maintaining a social life at her church with her church friends, in the neighborhood with neighborhood friends, and even at Rob's work functions with his work friends and colleagues and their wives. They had a good balance. Rob was dedicating his time to making sure the family had everything they needed financially, and Brenda was making sure that the household ran smoothly, that their children were in school and involved in their sports, music, and extracurricular activities. They were just a happy couple, a happy family. However, happy or not, I told you, nobody's relationship is perfect. Recall how I mentioned there was a time when Rob started to pick up his Bible more, even though they were already attending church. Rob was doing a lot as far as bringing in the salary that afforded his family this amazing home in this upscale neighborhood, nice cars, and the essentials. He still felt like he wasn't doing enough for Brenda. He loved her so much, and there was nothing he wouldn't do to make sure that she had everything she needed to be happy. And nobody said she wasn't happy, but Rob just kind of thought that they weren't as close as they were before, and as close as he wanted them to be. But that's to be expected in a lot of relationships. This is what happens when people become busy. Sometimes they don't have the same connection as they once did when they were dating, when things were fun and exciting because you had children in the mix, friends, work, and lots of new responsibilities. That kind of thing can make things a little dull and monotonous. Not only that, sometimes when you're working very long hours day in and day out, week after week, year after year, you can let your youthful physique go. You're sitting at a desk, entertaining clients, going out for dinners all the time and time again. Well, that was what Rob was doing. While Brenda was active at the pool at the park playing with the kids, I told you she had blossomed into a very stunning woman. Rob was so proud to have her on his arm. She was a complete package. Some would probably refer to her as the trophy wife. I have to mention, Brenda traded in her turtlenecks for definitely more revealing, mature adult clothing. If Rob thought she was hot at 19, he thought she was even more gorgeous at 30. But Rob wasn't the only one who noticed his wife. Yes, there were comments. She didn't look like the other wives that came to the work events. Many of the women were considered to dress frumpy or conservative, but not Brenda. She was different. She had enough of wearing modest outfits in her past. She was a grown woman who made her own rules, and good for her. That's the thing, though. She also looked a lot younger for her age. She was 30, and sometimes people would look and pause because of what she was wearing, as she looked 10 years younger. She could still pass for 20, even though she was 30. Rob kind of felt like he needed to keep up. We've all been there, one way or another. Even if it's not in a relationship, it could be trying to maintain a certain caliber at your job, or being at a different place in your life than someone else. It can put a lot of stress on someone, and Rob just didn't feel like he was good enough. He started to confide in his friends and family, telling them, "I want to have a stronger bond with my wife." So they gave him the advice to seek counseling from a pastor at their church and lean into God. In doing so, it renewed or revived Rob's faith, and it became more powerful than ever. He went from going out drinking with his clients to praying over them and listening to what God wanted when it came to everything that was important to him. Whether it was the fact that he threw himself into this religious aspect of his life and kind of forgot about anything he thought was wrong, or if it really did help to strengthen their marriage, either way, Rob became a fixture at the local church. Over the years, people watched him grow in his faith and become a mentor to others. He was very respected. There were other men who wanted what Rob had, with his family, his career, his finances, and his spirituality. He was looked at as a very devoted Christian. Over the next few years, many people began going to Rob for advice. They knew that he would always give them a positive attitude and open and honest answers. That's why the elders in the church actually looked toward Rob. It was 1997 when something happened with a fellow church, and they were in need. Their pastor had resigned, and it was a big deal because they lost the leader of their entire church, and they did not know what to do. Rob stepped up because he felt like this was part of his mission, to come up with a plan. That's what he did for work. He would come up with a plan. Even though it was advertising and marketing, it was still kind of the same thing. They had to advertise and market this church to have a new pastor want to come and be the leader. He and other members from the church got together and they prayed. They would have regular prayer meetings, trying to find out what God wanted them to do for the future of this church. Finally, Rob and a few others with the means to do so came up with a plan. They decided that their church would sponsor a new church for the one that lost their pastor. Rob was pivotal in this coming together. He founded this new church. It was called North Point Baptist Church, and he also became a deacon there. Now Rob, Brenda, and their children were even more of a fixture at North Point Baptist Church because they started to attend that one instead of Village Baptist. All eyes were on them, but mostly Brenda, because they didn't think she was dressing appropriately. This was an ongoing situation, and Brenda did not seem to care. It's not as though they were going to kick her out of a church that her husband founded. After all, aren't Christians supposed to be accepting? I don't know. I'm not sure, but they weren't accepting of her at this point. Despite the complaints, Brenda continued to wear what she wanted and teach her 5th grade Sunday school class every week. Rob continued to fulfill his role as deacon for North Point Baptist. He even did missionary work in South America and remained devoted to his family and smitten with Brenda. In 1999, Brenda's mom, Rose, retired so that she could spend time with her husband of 42 years and their grandchildren. Both Brenda and Rob's parents and families were very involved in their children's lives. Brenda's sister Kimberly and Rob's 3 brothers would regularly get together for holidays and birthdays. Kimberly would come to Parker and Tri-City sporting events. She also loved to take them to Winchell's Donut House every Saturday for donuts. That sounds yummy. Brenda had always been close with her sister, so it's no surprise that her sister was a huge part of her children's lives. Rob's dad was in real estate. It was a family business called Andrew Real Estate. Rob's dad served as the real estate commissioner, and his brother Tom served as District 1 vice president and had been on the local community board of realtors for a long time. Both families doted on their grandchildren and had the means to do so. They were also trying to instill the same values in them that they had instilled in Brenda and Rob. They just had no idea that on Rob's 39th birthday party, September 19, 2001, it would be the very last time that family had an ordinary celebration together. Their lives were about to change forever. Over the years, other significant changes had already occurred. One was the heartbreaking death of Brenda's father on September 16, 2000, the day of Brenda's sister's birthday. How sad is it if your father were to die on your birthday? It's a day that you usually celebrate happiness in life, and now it was a yearly reminder that their father was no longer with them. These are the times that families come together. Kim and her husband Jim were close with Brenda. They had 5 kids of their own, and this was the first parent that had passed away, so it changed things. A year later, in November 2001, the families were gearing up for the Thanksgiving holiday, which fell on November 22nd that year. But just 2 days before they had a chance to come together for food and fun, time would stand still. Another tragedy would occur. On the evening of November 20th, a 911 call came in to the Oklahoma City Police Department, reporting what sounded like shots fired in the quiet Landsbrook neighborhood. Shortly after that, another 911 call came from Shaftesbury Road, the address of Brenda and Rob Andrew. The woman's voice on the other end was frantic. You could hardly understand what she was saying. She couldn't even catch her breath. Something terrible had happened. It was Brenda, and she'd been shot. She had finally managed to get to the phone to call 911 and was desperately trying to explain to the operator that someone had come into her home and fired shots at both her and her husband, Rob. The operator was trying to understand what was going on, but Brenda was hyperventilating. She told him, "I've been shot. My husband has been shot." When they asked her who shot them, she said she didn't know but needed help, that there was blood everywhere, that her arm was stinging, and that she was hurt. She made her way back to the garage where Rob was lying on the ground. The operator asked if he was still breathing, and she said yes, he was still breathing and trying to talk. The operator told her that help would be on the way. They sent EMTs and police out to the Andrew home, and they arrived within minutes. When they got on the scene, the garage door was open, and they could see Brenda kneeling on the ground beside Rob, who was lying face up on the garage floor near the door that led into the home. They could tell that both Brenda and Rob were injured. The EMTs began to render aid to both victims. This just didn't happen in this neighborhood. It was a quiet community. They didn't hear about violence, let alone something like this happening to a family like this. As emergency personnel got closer to Rob, they noticed he was clutching a trash bag against his body in front of him. He was not breathing. He was lying there, lifeless, in a pool of blood. It was obvious upon closer inspection that he had 2 gunshot wounds, one to the side of his neck and one in his stomach. Sadly, at this point, there was nothing they could do for Rob, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. Brenda was also hurt. She was shot in the upper part of her left arm and was being transferred to the hospital for treatment. The police were trying to ask her as many questions as they could to find out who did this, and she was giving them as much information as possible. But she was in a terrifying situation and was in shock. Who wouldn't be? She had just witnessed her husband being murdered and someone attempting to murder her too. All she could remember was that 2 men, she believed they were men, in dark clothing with ski masks had entered her garage while she and Rob were inside. She said they started shooting and then fled on foot. Now the police were concerned about the neighborhood and the community. These people could be anywhere at this point. So they put a helicopter in the sky and decided to canvass the neighborhood. They went door to door on foot and were also patrolling in vehicles to see if they could locate anyone matching that description. Meanwhile, other officers who had arrived on the scene were doing a sweep of the house. This was a 3-level home. They had to make their way from the garage up to the other bedrooms and ultimately to the master bedroom, where they could hear the TV on. With their guns drawn, they entered that bedroom and found both of the children, 11-year-old Tri-City and 7-year-old Parker, watching TV, unharmed. Thank goodness. They were taken out of the house and over to a neighbor's home until the scene was cleared. But these poor children had no idea what had just happened to their parents. I honestly cannot imagine. They were just so lucky, and so was Brenda. They were lucky to be alive, but Brenda was not without injury. She was rushed to the hospital to treat the bullet wound, and luckily it hadn't hit any major arteries. It was a through-and-through wound, so the bullet wasn't lodged inside. However, she did need to stay in the hospital overnight to make sure that everything was okay. Detectives were eager to get information from her, but they knew that she needed to relax because she was going to be told that her husband was deceased. The coroner was called out, and the death investigation technicians removed Rob from the scene so that the crime scene techs could begin to collect evidence. The first thing they noticed was the black trash bag that Rob was clutching in his hands. They removed it from his grasp and saw that it was full of empty soda cans. The impression that they got was that either Rob used the trash bag as a shield, or he was in the middle of taking out the trash when he was wounded. Here are the significant findings from the scene at the home. A .22 caliber bullet was found stuck in one of the walls of the garage. A 16-gauge shotgun shell was found on top of Brenda's maroon minivan, which was parked inside the garage. Rob's black Nissan was parked outside in front of the garage. There were no signs of forced entry on any of the doors or windows in the home. It's likely that the perpetrators entered through the open garage door from the driveway area. Rob's wallet was still in his pocket, and some of the pellets from the shotgun had gone through portions of his wallet. None of the Andrews' valuables had been removed. Nothing was taken, and no cars were stolen. However, it was unclear if there was cash stashed in the home or other valuables. At this point, they were categorizing this as a home invasion, but did not know why someone would target the Andrew family. They did have money, plus they were one of the only families home during the Thanksgiving holiday, which is a big time for crime. Black Friday is usually one of the biggest days for hits like this, with lots of Christmas presents inside before Christmas morning shopping. People are often out of town, so perhaps the person who did this thought the Andrews would be gone. Once that garage door opened and they realized Brenda and Rob were inside, things went awry. From the evidence gathered, Rob had been shot in 2 different places, his neck and his stomach. The wounds indicated that the 16-gauge shotgun was the weapon used, and a .22 caliber gun was used on Brenda. Despite losing a significant amount of blood, Brenda was coherent and requested to be brought down to Oklahoma City Police Headquarters to provide details she could remember from the attack. Meanwhile, police were going door to door. They noticed that many people were out of town for Thanksgiving, and the neighborhood was very quiet. 2 neighbors had heard something that night. Lisa Kistler heard a loud noise, like 3 shotgun blasts, and Carol Schutt had heard someone scream. The police searched by car around the vicinity, but nothing turned up. This wasn't much for detectives to go on. Even though doctors wanted Brenda to rest, she was adamant about going down to the police station and telling them everything right away. She did not want to wait a second. She didn't want to forget anything while everything was fresh in her mind. She wanted to get down there immediately, still in her hospital gown. When she talked to investigators, she explained that she and her husband were in the garage. He was working on relighting the pilot light on the furnace because it had gone out again. As they were working on it, 2 people walked through the open garage door out of nowhere. Without warning, they came towards them, and the next thing she knew, she heard a shot ring out. Everything happened really fast, and she couldn't tell exactly what was going on. At that point, she was in shock. She ran towards the inner part of the house through that door because her children were in there. While running that way, she heard a second shot followed by a third. Then she noticed something happened to her arm, so she ran to grab the phone, dialed 911, and then ran up to the master bedroom to make sure the children were okay. All the while, she was explaining what was happening to the 911 operator. She said she saw two people, she thought they were men, wearing all black and ski masks covering their faces. She went back down to the garage, and while she was on the phone with 911, she was checking on Rob. Everything else had already been recorded for the police. This was good information, but unfortunately, it wasn't enough for them to go on. Criminals don't exactly try to expose their identity when committing crimes. But since nothing had been taken, they wondered why else someone would target the Andrew family. Brenda explained that this wasn't the first time their home had been targeted. She had talked to the police about 3 months earlier about someone who had possibly tried to burglarize their home. They asked the typical questions. Were there any enemies that your family had? She said she didn't think so, but didn't know everything about what Rob did. He went away a lot on business trips and knew a lot more people than she did. Both of them were involved in their community and their church. They definitely didn't have any volatile situations with anyone in their lives, so she had no idea. She was also obviously still in shock and distraught. Most of all, Brenda wants to know where her children are. The police are still questioning her and ask if the men said anything. She responds that she did hear them say something to Rob, but she couldn't make out what it was. She didn't recognize their voices, and so far, everything that investigators know about the crime scene matches what Brenda is telling them. They now believe there were two shooters, considering the two calibers of weapons used in the crime. As you might expect, they need to fan out and find people who knew the Andrew family, specifically Rob, since it appears he was the initial target. They need to understand what his lifestyle was really like. Looks can be deceiving, and there might be hidden aspects of someone's life that are not immediately apparent. Just because someone goes to church doesn't mean they are a good person, or that their community involvement is a front. It's imperative for investigators to go to Rob's work, his church, and any other place where they might locate someone who could provide information about whether anyone wanted to harm Rob or his family. They are also interviewing Brenda's friends and family. Fortunately, the couple shared many friends, as Brenda often socialized with the wives of Rob's friends. The word about the tragedy travels rapidly, especially in a quiet neighborhood like this. The media is all over it, and families who were out of town for the holiday are concerned about whether their homes have been robbed. The police can't check each home individually to see if they've been burglarized. While searching for the perpetrators, they could have been robbing other houses, adding to the anxiety of the community. When Brenda and Rob's next-door neighbors, Judy and Dean Gigstad, hear about the tragedy, they can't believe it. They're shocked to see their neighborhood on the news with reports of a murder. Judy immediately calls Brenda, who initially doesn't answer, but eventually does. Judy is distraught and asks when she will be back. Brenda, knowing she needs support, plans to cut their vacation short and return in a few days. They are eager to return home to check on their house and belongings. Brenda, who was planning the holidays, now has to plan her husband's funeral. Brenda will have the support of her family, including her sister Kimberly, her sister's husband Jim, and the police, who are notifying Rob's family, his brothers Bill, Tim, and Tom, as well as his mother Llewellyn and father Yar. The news of the tragedy is heartbreaking for Rob's family, but they remain strong in their faith and focus on supporting Brenda and the children. As the investigators continue their work, 5 days pass with numerous interviews and calls. A significant development occurs when Judy and Dean return from their trip. They get a major break in the case, not as witnesses, but due to their proximity to the Andrew home. Judy and Dean's house is located to the left of the Andrew home when facing it. One of the rooms in their house overlooks the deck on the side of Brenda and Rob's home. The two homes are very close, separated only by a fence. Judy's house has 4 bedrooms. As Judy is unpacking her suitcase in the master bedroom and organizing her clothes and shoes, She opens the closet door and notices something immediately. She's scared because there's something that's not right. She used to have a little shoe rack, and it was gone. Why would a shoe rack be gone? All the shoes were still there, they were just placed on the floor where the shoe rack used to be. That's weird. That's odd. She doesn't want to be too alarmed or anything because one of her sons, Jeff, did stop by the home before heading out to meet them for the Thanksgiving holiday out of town. But as she's looking around the room, she notices that her bed is lopsided. It's tilted to one side. Something is not right. Something's off. She kneels down, gets on the floor, and starts to look underneath. That's when she finds the shoe rack. She pulls it out from under the bed, and as you can see, it's clearly broken. It looks like someone stuffed it under the bed to hide it. What is going on here? Judy moves to the next room, which is the bedroom that overlooks Brenda and Rob's deck, the one I showed you right here. While she's in that room, she immediately notices that the closet door is wide open, and she knows she would not have left it open. Once again, she's thinking, okay, maybe her son Jeff, who was supposed to come by and get a few things, left it open. She looks down, and sitting on the ground in front of the closet door is a 16-gauge shotgun shell. That's definitely not normal. That is not her shotgun shell. Now they know someone has been inside their home, and that is terrifying. When Dean looks at the shotgun shell, he says it looks like it has been ejected from a gun. Well, that's concerning, because the only person that comes to mind who had access to their home was their son Jeff. They call him up, and at this point they're thinking, could he have had something to do with that crime? They're just trying to come up with all kinds of theories. At this point, they have no idea what's going on. Jeff would come over from time to time. He doesn't have to tell them he is coming, but he would come to borrow things. They asked him, okay, so you've been inside the house? Were you in these rooms when you came over? Because supposedly, he stopped there for a playpen for his kid before he met them on their trip. He tells his mom, I was there, but no, I didn't even go in your bedroom. I didn't break your shoe rack. I only went in the guest bedroom to get the playpen, and then I left. But the room he's talking about was the room with the closet door open and the shotgun shell. It was sitting on its brass rod. I'm going to show it to you right here. This is the way it looks, because it's a 16 gauge, one that's not the most common. You usually see a 12 gauge or even a 20 gauge, but a 16 gauge is not as common. Dean had remembered when he was listening to the TV that Rob was shot with a 16 gauge shotgun. So they immediately call the police. Now, an investigation begins at the Gigstar's house. The investigators get into the closet where the shoe rack was, and they guess it was probably used to get into the attic, because when they look up, they notice that the access point to the attic has been slid open. They figure out that someone has climbed into that attic and stepped on the shoe rack, which didn't hold their weight and broke. So they probably just stuffed it under the bed because they wanted to buy some time in case someone came home. Maybe they wouldn't notice. But of course they did. So that attic crawl space cover was opened, and they went up there and found bullets inside. These were unused bullets from a .22 caliber. If you remember, that was the caliber used to cause Brenda the injury to her arm. In this attic, there's a small window, and guess where that window looks out to? Directly to the Andrews' home. So of course, investigators are now theorizing that the killers were inside the Gigstar's home, planning this ambush on this family. But who is the killer? Well, Judy has to admit to the investigators that their son Jeff was inside on the day the murder took place. He had the key to their home, which was relevant because there were no signs of forced entry at their residence. Because Jeff was the last known person inside their residence, and he had access with a key, they have to question him. He is now at the top of the potential suspects list. He explains he wasn't there on the day of the murders. He was there the day after the murders in the morning. He wants to be clear and make sure they understand that this is the truth. Jeff's alibi is that 1, he was never at the residence on the day of the murder, so he couldn't have done anything wrong. And 2, he could prove it. He was there to check on his parents' house, collect their mail, and get the playpen to take on the trip to Kansas for the holiday. When he was on his way out the door, he noticed there were messages that had not been listened to yet on the answering machine. He pressed play and listened to a couple of the messages. They were from friends of the family, and they were asking if everybody was okay because they had just heard the news about the murders. The answering machine has a record of when the messages were played, and the messages were played the day after the murders, just like Jeff said. Jeff was the gig star's adult son. He was married with children, and he said he was home with his wife when he found out about the murders. They asked him if he had any weapons, and he does. He has a shotgun. So they definitely need to take a look, but they realize right away it's a 12 gauge, not a 16 gauge like the one that killed Rob. This, coupled with the fact that he had an alibi and no motive that they could think of to want to hurt this family, means they had to move on to other suspects. But after speaking with Jeff and doing ballistics testing, the test confirmed that the ammo was from the same weapon used on the Andrews. So the investigators put together a theory of how they think the killers carried out this crime. They believe that after those shots were fired, the perpetrators ran. It would only take seconds to get to the next-door neighbor's home and hide inside. They believe the perpetrators slept there overnight, which is such a nasty, gross feeling, an invasion of privacy, thinking that these people were in your home. But there's something even crazier. So the next place they go after clearing Jeff is North Point Baptist Church. The Andrews family had many friends at this church, and the investigators want to talk to the closest friends first. They meet with a woman named Shannon James. She tells investigators she met Rob when they were on a missions trip together in Brazil. When he told her that he did advertising and marketing, she just lit up. She was so excited and told him that was her dream job. She had always wanted to be in advertising her whole life. So guess what? Rob gave her a job. That's a pretty big deal considering he waited so long to get his dream job. I just want to stop and say the story hasn't even started yet, and it's about to get really crazy. Some of it is going to blow your mind when you find out everything that's going on behind the scenes. Just wait. Shannon explains that Rob is a dedicated Christian with a very strong relationship with Christ. He's a mentor as well as her boss, everything we've already talked about. Moving on, Shannon says that Brenda is a loving mother, sweet and quiet, and teaches Sunday school at church. Detectives are thinking they're not going to get anywhere in this case, because they keep hearing the same things over and over again about Rob and Brenda, no matter who they interview. There are hundreds of people at this church. If you're impatient to know more, just imagine how frustrating it was for detectives, because it's the same story every time. It's like it had almost been rehearsed. Maybe because they're Christians, they didn't want to talk poorly about other Christians. The detectives didn't know for sure, but when you find out, you'll be sitting here scratching your head and saying, why didn't anyone do anything or say anything? Why did all this happen? Could it have been stopped? Those were the things I was thinking. You would think someone like Shannon, who had known Rob for 15 years, the one he gave a job to, would know more about his life. But Rob was private. You're going to find out there's only a handful of people that he really confided in. So what about Brenda? When they were asking around the church, investigators heard that Brenda liked to flirt with other women's husbands and would act a little too friendly toward men other than her husband. She would wear revealing outfits around the house while she had handymen there, or she even changed the color of her hair once because she learned that a guy she was flirting with loved redheads. This sounds more like town gossip than evidence of some kind, but this is what they're gathering at this point. However, the investigators were told they really need to look into what Brenda did in her spare time while Rob was at work. They're also informed that the elders actually asked Brenda to stop teaching Sunday school class. Why was that? They were going to have to meet with them to find out. Maybe it had to do with the next fact they learned about Brenda and Rob, that they didn't have a perfect marriage. They were separated. That's right, so how could this be possible? Because we keep hearing about the fact that they are a happy couple. Sometimes, especially when you are a Christian, you want to keep these things under wraps. Rob wasn't the one who wanted to get divorced. He didn't believe in divorce. He was absolutely in love with Brenda, but apparently it wasn't the first time they had been separated throughout their 17-year marriage. There were other times when they had to give each other a break, and ultimately they would end up back together. Unfortunately, over the years, they were growing apart. As individuals, they were both wonderful people to all their friends and family. Brenda was a supportive mother who would do anything for her children, and Rob was a devout Christian, helping his community and bringing people closer to the Lord. But that wasn't bringing his wife closer to him. Eventually, whether it was because Brenda had already lived that life growing up and just wanted to be free, or because the relationship naturally ran its course, the couple started to talk about separating. It's hard. Their lives were so intertwined. They had a bunch of the same friends and a beautiful home where they were raising their young children. These situations are never easy. Rob, being the persistent person that he was, believed in never giving up. He would never give up on Brenda. He was always going to try to reconcile the relationship, no matter what. But just like Rob had been confiding in his friends and family about his insecurities and his desire to be closer to Brenda, she had also been confiding in her friends and family about things going on in their relationship, and it turns out she thought he was kind of an absent father, that he cared more about the church community and his work than being home with his children. She thought he was a workaholic, oppressive, and overbearing, and she had had enough. There are always multiple sides to a story and many different opinions. I guess that Brenda thought strongly enough about the relationship not working out that she refused to continue to try over and over again. It was true, Rob was traveling a lot for his job. As a matter of fact, while the separation was brewing and their marriage seemed to be falling apart, the Twin Towers in New York City were falling to the ground. This was back in September of 2001. The terrorist attacks of 9/11 happened just days before Rob's 39th birthday, September 19th. He was stuck in California after the planes were grounded, and the entire United States was dealing with an absolute devastating catastrophe. Brenda wasn't exactly happy to see Rob when he returned. She was trying to keep her distance so that they could move on to the next step of their separation. However, she did play nicely because it was his birthday and the family still got together. I told you it was going to be the last time they had an ordinary celebration as a family. However, the day afterward, it was time. She basically kicked Rob out of their home. Oh wait, because you need to hear everything. This case gets so twisted, convoluted, and shocking, and I'm sure it's going to affect you as much as it did me. By October 3rd, Brenda had filed for divorce, and even though he was served with the divorce papers, that wasn't going to stop him. He was going to lean into God and pray that his marriage could be healed. Friends and family expected this to be hard for the Andrew family, but they never expected them to go through what they now know happened to them. You never think anything like this is going to happen to the people close to you. Brenda and Rob were still there for their children. They came up with a plan that, for the time being, Rob was going to get a nearby apartment. They both wanted to be supportive of their children, especially with the Thanksgiving holiday around the corner. They wanted things to remain as normal as possible. They were both still spending time with and visiting their children and being involved in their everyday normal activities. But it wasn't really that different for Rob to be at his apartment, because he wasn't around the children as much as Brenda was. She really was the parent in the household. The children were attached to her. She did everything for them. Divorce can be really messy, but sometimes it can be completely amicable. You're dealing with a Christian man and a woman who were raised with the same upbringing and values. But just because you're church-going people doesn't mean that everyone you associate with is good. Somebody wanted to cause harm to the Andrew family. Somebody was concocting a plan. The first clue that something wasn't right was back on October 26th. They find this out when they interview a woman who worked with Rob. Her name is Barb Mercer Green. Barb was Rob's co-worker, friend, and confidant. She was like a second mother to him, since Rob was actually the age of her children. She tried to lend an ear, be a voice of reason, and give him a shoulder to cry on if he needed one. And he needed one. On October 26th, Rob comes into the office, and he's not his normal cheerful, outgoing self. Barb wants to know what is wrong. He doesn't hesitate. He lets her know that something bizarre just happened to him, and he's really freaked out. He walked to his car that morning and saw a pool of liquid underneath, which was concerning. So he drives his car to a nearby auto repair shop. The mechanic takes one look underneath the car, and his eyes get wide. He's shocked. He shares his concern with Rob and says he thinks someone has intentionally cut the brakes on his vehicle. So Rob is shaken up. He doesn't know what's going on. He gets a taxi and goes into work and tells Barb what happened. Now, there's a lot of things you don't know that Barb knows at this point. So I need to go back and explain some of those to you, because they are vital to understanding why Barb was so concerned when Rob came in that day and shared this news with her. First, I want to tell you about what happened when detectives interviewed the elders of the church. They found out that Brenda was dressing inappropriately, but that's not why she got fired from her Sunday school position. It was actually because she was supposedly, possibly, allegedly carrying on inappropriate behaviors with fellow churchgoers, specifically a Sunday school teacher, James Pavitt. Apparently, the interactions were bad enough that the elders fired both of them from the Sunday school. So, who was this James Pavitt person? Well, he was actually a friend of the Andrews family. He was a deacon in the church. He and Rob went on hunting trips together and did business deals with one another. James's wife and family would hang out with the Andrew family. James is about 10 years his senior. He's 48 years old. What's going on? People have said that James and Brenda looked more like boyfriend and girlfriend than just friends. This was the accusation that was the breaking point for Brenda. She filed for divorce because the rumors about her were swirling forever, and they just kept going. Finally, they got into Rob's head. Rob ended up confronting her, and she said, "I've had enough. I am not doing anything inappropriate with this man, but I'm filing for divorce." The whispers actually started before this. James had filed for divorce earlier that summer, and that's when people at the church started to assume he did that because he was obsessed with Brenda. They were seen acting, in the words of the women at the church, like teenagers, giggling and passing notes around during church service. The parents started to be uncomfortable sending their children to Sunday school, so they both had to be terminated from their positions. This is when all of this is going to come together, but not really, because there are so many twists and turns. Once you find out exactly what's going on, it's still going to be bizarre. I had to know everything, every detail. I just had to find out, and investigators do too. They're speculating that possibly there was some kind of obsession going on here, that James was obsessed with Brenda, that the families had spent time together, and somehow he became infatuated with her. Possibly she was very friendly with James. He thought she wanted something that he did, but she possibly wanted more and didn't want to give it to him. So he decided to hurt the family. James was pretty respected in the church community as well, but he was also feared because he was formerly in the Air Force. There were rumors that he was in the Special Forces. He would actually brag that he had killed people and that he was a really dangerous person. So maybe his past caught up with him, and maybe he was being a dangerous person once again. They have to know more. So this is where we left off with Barb, Rob's confidant at work. After Rob found out the rumors were swirling about James and Brenda, he kind of went off on her, which is what led to her filing for divorce. I can't know for sure whether Rob was just paranoid when he walked in that day, knowing his brakes had been cut, but he told Barb he thought James was trying to kill him. Detectives had gotten in touch with James Pavitt's ex-wife. James met her when he was in the Air Force in Southeast Asia. He was a military police officer, and they had been married for 9 years before their divorce in 2001. Investigators asked her what she could tell them about James. She said he was the kindest man she had ever met. He was so kind all throughout their marriage. But he said he wanted a divorce because she didn't get along with his family. However, as they got closer to getting the actual divorce, he said it was for her protection because of the problems with his previous duty in the Special Forces. He told her Korea was the only place where she would be safe in the whole world. She ended up moving back to Korea, but she returned because not long after the divorce, James called her and said he had made the biggest mistake of his life. But when she came back, she said the man she had always known wasn't there anymore. It wasn't the same man she had known for the past 9 years. Something wasn't right with him, and it was very concerning. They asked her where he was, and she said she didn't know. She said she wasn't even sure where he was living, but she did have his work address. He was currently working for Prudential Insurance Company. So they went there to talk to his supervisor, and that's when they find out from coworkers that he liked to impress people with his ability to kill. He seemed to have an obsession with bragging about how dangerous he was. So it's true. What we heard earlier is corroborated. Not only that, and this is really disgusting to me personally as an animal lover, specifically a dog lover, but one of his coworkers said that James liked to shoot dogs. Every time he would see a dog, he would talk about shooting it. That's sad, disgusting, and mean. Another coworker described him as creepy. At this point, he shoots to the top of the list when it comes to potential suspects for detectives. They're going to track James down, but there's something more important happening. Rob's funeral. It was Monday, November 26th at Crossings Community Church at 10 a.m. All of Rob's closest friends and family were gathered together to say goodbye to a man they loved and adored, and who would be gone forever. It seemed like everyone had shown up. Everyone from church, from Jordan, Rob's entire family, Brenda's entire family, their neighborhood friends. The entire place was packed. He had a huge group of clients that he worked with over the years, and everyone came to pay their respects. The funeral kept being postponed. It wasn't starting. Finally, one of the ministers presiding over the funeral got up and said they weren't starting on time because some of the family members were not there. This raised a red flag, and everybody started looking around, trying to figure out which family member would be missing or late. 10 minutes went by, the funeral still hadn't started. Then 20 minutes went by. So many people wanted to say goodbye to Rob and support Brenda and the children, but that's the thing, and this is so scary. As people continued to look around, they were not seeing Brenda or the children anywhere. This was out of character for Brenda. They had no idea what was going on. Brenda had planned the funeral arrangements with her family and her neighbor Judy. Everyone was immediately concerned. They didn't want to jump to conclusions quite yet, so they waited. But after 45 minutes, with no sign of Brenda, and multiple calls going straight to her voicemail, family members called the police and asked them to do a welfare check at the Andrew home. They were worried that something had happened to the children and Brenda, that maybe the criminals had come back to finish the job. It was terrifying. While the funeral was going on, police went to the house and didn't find anything out of the ordinary by walking around the perimeter of the home. They looked in the windows and went back, telling the family they didn't find anything. Because the funeral was going on, it was hard for the family to stop what they were doing to figure out exactly what happened. They thought the police were going to take care of it. When nothing was taken care of and the funeral was over, the family insisted the police go back. This time they said, "Take a key, go inside, and find out what's going on." Inside, they found out that the minivan was gone. It had been parked in the garage just a day earlier, and now it was gone. So the police get a phone call from Brenda's sister, Kim. She says, "Listen, I just found out Brenda and the kids are fine. I'm going to track them down and have them call you." However, after some time goes by and the police do not hear from her, they call Kim back. She said, "You know what? I'm really sorry. I was wrong. I had bad information. I don't know where Brenda is." Wow, how can you make that mistake? But it happened. I guess they were literally playing telephone. But it's only gonna get worse. This is when police reach out once again to James's supervisor and find out that James hasn't been to work in a week. At this point, they feel like they're in a race against time. This man is clearly dangerous, and sure enough, just a few hours later, police find James's pickup truck near Southwest 122nd and Penn Avenue. There's something worse. It's something they find out that makes them very fearful for the safety of these children. Someone comes forward and says they were a witness to a notarized document presented by James Pavitt. This document was supposedly signed by Robert Andrew, allowing his daughter Trinity and son Parker to leave the country. This document was used by James to have travel visas issued for Brenda and Rob's children. This man is trying to take these two poor little children out of the country. They just lost their father and their mother had almost been killed. This to me is crazy. I would be out of my mind. Authorities issue an all-points bulletin for Brenda and the children because they're starting to think that James killed Rob, and possibly now Brenda, and plans to hurt the children. From all the reports they got, it seems like James has been gone for about a day, but Brenda may have been gone longer. The neighbor, Dean, comes forward and says that he tried to call Brenda the night before around 7 p.m. and didn't get an answer. He called back at 8 p.m. and still didn't hear back from her. At this point, no one is sure who spoke to Brenda last and whether she and the children are safe. As investigators dig deeper, they look into Brenda and James's bank accounts and find out that Brenda has recently transferred money out of an account that she shared with Rob, her deceased husband. This isn't necessarily something to be too suspicious about, but for all they know, she could have been forced to do so. That's what they were thinking until friends start coming forward with more information. One of those friends was Barb, remember her? She was Rob's confidant. Over the years, Barb had been there to listen to a lot of stories about Brenda from Rob. So while these stories are only one-sided, Barb told investigators that there was a night when the family was having spaghetti dinner. Brenda was getting annoyed. She told Rob she hated the way he ate food and proceeded to dump a plate of pasta into his lap. Not only that, but according to Rob, Brenda had always hated things about him. On their wedding night, she told him she thought the marriage was a mistake and that she hated him. If all this is true, why was Rob still with Brenda, and what was the context? It's not as though either one of these people were forced to marry each other, from what I read. But Barb insists that from the day they were married forward, Brenda has never been faithful to Rob. James is just one of many of her affairs. Barb says, "You know who you need to talk to? Ron Stump. He was Rob's best friend. He's the guy Brenda was flirting with, once her husband's own best friend. Ron is the one who liked redheads, and immediately the next time he saw her, she had red hair. The floodgates are about to open. Ron Stump is the man who's known Rob the longest. He's his very best friend and spends a lot of time with Rob. What I heard from this interview made me really sad. It started to make me think about whether I actually know any of the people in my life the way I think I do." Investigators track Ron down for questioning. It was basically the case of how far back do you want me to go, because clearly he was about to tell them a lot of information about Brenda and his best friend Rob. It made me sad, as I said, because he explained what they already heard before, that Brenda didn't seem to love Rob the way that Rob loved Brenda. It always seemed one-sided. Ron tells investigators they need to track down Rob's journal, his prayer journal. Not only does he write scripture in there, but he writes everything about his life. They need to look at it because if they do, they'll find out everything Ron is going to tell them and be able to corroborate all the stories. Starting with the fact that before they got married, when they were engaged, Rob decided to surprise Brenda when she was at college in Kansas. When he drives up to the campus and asks where she is because she's not in her own dorm room, he's directed to the dorm room of Brenda's ex-boyfriend. That's right, she was staying in her ex-boyfriend's dorm room the night before, and it's clear that she wasn't being faithful to Rob even back then. He did confide in his dad about the situation and others, explaining it in a way saying that maybe it was just something innocent, but deep down he knew. But he just loved her so much that he let it slide. It's also true that on their wedding night, not only did she say that the marriage was a mistake, but she really did say that she hated him. This marriage was a disaster from the beginning, and Ron and others couldn't understand why Rob wouldn't see things their way. It's like he just wanted it to work so badly and thought that he would be able to change her, but it only got worse. Even when Ron would say something like, "Rob, wake up, see what's going on around you," the people who loved Rob were only trying to help. But Rob had that persistent attitude that was part of his DNA. He never wanted to give up. Ron told investigators he knew for sure there were two affairs that Brenda definitely engaged in. One of the affairs happened in 1997. Back when Brenda was working at the bank, she met a friend there whose husband was Rick Nunley. Rick and his wife would hang out with Brenda and Rob, go on double dates, and get to know each other more. Brenda started to confide in Rick about some of the issues she was having in her marriage, and Rick confided in Brenda about some of his own problems. Over the years, they became closer, sharing things about their marriages that they were concerned about or disliked about their partners. Eventually, Rick filed for divorce in October 1997. When investigators asked him his thoughts on Brenda, he said she was very hospitable, intelligent, loved her children, was a good cook, and a nice person. However, that nice person found out he filed for divorce and started coming on to him. It takes two to tango, and eventually, they ended up having a sexual relationship. This relationship lasted for months until the spring of 1998, when it fizzled out. Despite that, Brenda and Rick remained really good friends. They would call each other regularly, talk about everything in their lives, and occasionally meet in person. Rick says that at this point they were strictly platonic, but Brenda continued to share information and confide in him about her issues with Rob. She expressed many times that she didn't want to be with him anymore. Investigators pressed Ron for more information, asking if Brenda had ever talked about wanting to hurt her husband. He said no, nothing of that nature. She never gave him any impression that she would hurt Rob in any way. Cell phone records indicated there were 87 calls between Brenda and Rick during the months of September, October, and November 2001. If only we knew exactly what those phone calls were about. The next affair that Ron tells investigators about involved a man named James Higgins, who was also married. This happened in 1999. As I explain this to you, I'm telling you what Ron is saying to investigators, and then what the people they investigated are saying back to the investigators, if that makes sense. When questioned, Mr. Higgins said he met Brenda while working at the grocery store. She came in, flirted, and was very friendly. When asked what he meant by flirting, Higgins said she was dressed in sexy outfits, short dresses and tops showing cleavage, and she came on to him until he finally reacted. Despite being married, they ended up getting together. In March 1999, Brenda came into the grocery store, handed him a key to a motel room and said, "Meet me there when you get off work." Higgins did just that. When asked who paid for the hotels, Higgins said Brenda did. Their sexual relationship continued for over a year, with most of their meetings occurring at motels, hotels, and sometimes even in her car. There were instances where they had sex in the Andrew home, which is particularly disturbing. This affair continued until May 2001, just before Rob was found murdered. Why did it end? Brenda told Higgins it wasn't fun anymore. Running around behind her husband's back had lost its appeal. However, she kept Higgins around, just as she did with her previous lover, Rick. Higgins even became a friend of the family. Brenda introduced him to her children and her husband, and eventually hired Higgins to do renovations on the Andrew home, including a new paint job. Neighbors commented that the paint wasn't even dry before Robert was killed, an expression indicating it was done just before his death. Higgins also mentioned that although they were still friends and he was helping with renovations, he got upset when Brenda started coming on to his sons. While the exact age of the sons is unclear, they were likely teenagers, given their involvement in the renovation. This brings us to whether Brenda was responsible for Rob's death. Some believe it's not about her killing him, but about letting men into her life who would continue wanting relationships even when Brenda was done. Someone like James. According to Ron, James and Brenda were definitely having an affair. Ron told investigators some things we already knew. James used to be in the military, recently got a divorce, but the affair started well before that, probably right after she ended things with Higgins. James and Brenda even took a trip together with the children to Texas, which Brenda loved. I guess Brenda was mad that Rob made her leave, and maybe she planned on starting a new life with her secret lover and her children back in Texas. However, to be fair, this was after Rob and Brenda had separated. She was free to date whoever she wanted and be with whoever she wanted. She was an adult after all, and they were getting a divorce. Her intention was to leave Rob, and it was like once those divorce papers were put into motion, that's when things started to go awry. Ron mentions the brake lines, and we already know we've heard this from Barb, but Ron goes further to say that Rob called the police about this and filed a report. Investigators are on it, wanting to pull up that information to see if there's anything relevant to the case. Rob Andrew had filed a report with the Oklahoma City Police. He detailed his suspicion that James Pavitt had cut his brake lines and was trying to kill him by causing an accident on the highway. Why? Because one day while he was at work, he received a phone call from a strange woman, not Brenda. She said, "Is this Mr. Andrew?" He said yes. She continued, "Oh my God, hurry, come quick. Your wife and your kids have had an accident and have been rushed to Norman Hospital. Get here as fast as you can." That hospital was 40 minutes away, and Rob would have had to get on the highway to get there. It seemed suspicious, and he thought something was off. His brakes were cut, and now he was getting this call, like the oldest trick in the book. He told the police that someone was trying to kill him and that he suspected James. Rob also told police about his suspicion that James might be having a relationship with his wife. At this point, Rob decides to look into his life insurance policy. It makes sense to check if you think someone might be trying to kill you, especially since his wife was the beneficiary. What was even more unbelievable was that James Pavitt was the one who wrote the insurance policy because he was an insurance agent at Prudential Life Insurance. Before this, Rob and James were friends. They went on hunting trips together, were both deacons at the church, and did business together. One of those businesses was this life insurance policy, an $800,000 policy, with Brenda as the beneficiary. Rob contacted James and confronted him, saying he needed to change the beneficiary on his policy to his children. For some reason, James was trying to convince Rob that he couldn't change it because he didn't own the policy. This happened right before the Andrews divorce hearing, scheduled for November 1st. James was actually subpoenaed to testify at that hearing, but November 1st rolled around and he was nowhere to be found. He was held in contempt of court. At the divorce hearing, Rob told the judge he wanted the life insurance beneficiary changed from Brenda to his children. The judge issued an order and the change was made. The new beneficiary was the children, and one of Rob's brothers was the trustee. As investigators continued their work, they found out that the day after the divorce hearing, Brenda called the insurance company to check if she was still the beneficiary on Rob's insurance policy. They told her she was again because a document had just been faxed in and backdated to March, containing what looked like Rob's signature. Interestingly, at the divorce hearing, when the judge asked what Rob and Brenda argued about, Rob said the only arguments he had ever had with Brenda were about removing her from the insurance policy. This made him believe that James and Brenda were conspiring to kill him to claim the $800,000 life insurance policy. That's why, the day after the hearing, Rob filed a more explicit report with the police, saying they were conspiring to kill him. Still, the police did nothing. Rob was so scared that on November 19th, the day before he was murdered, he provided the police with a cassette tape containing 2 suspicious calls urging him to rush to Norman Hospital. After the call from the strange woman, he received another call from a man saying the exact same thing. At this point, Rob is thinking someone's trying to kill him. Investigators dig up the 911 call, where you hear him literally telling the dispatcher that it sounds like attempted murder. Rob is solving his own murder from the grave. Meanwhile, they come across journal entries, and this was incredibly sad. The entries from the weeks prior to his death reveal the pain he was going through and how he was trying to cope with the loss of the wife he loved. One of the passages said, "I'm in great pain. It was on November 14th. Jesus will intercede for me and will allow right things to occur for me. I don't need to fear failure or have guilt in me. I realize that God is for us, who can be against us. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." I try not to get emotional because the next part is hard to process. It connects to what's going to happen later, and when I put it all together, I couldn't believe how painful it was. On November 19th, the evening before Rob was killed, he was with Ron at Rob's apartment. Around 9:15 p.m., Rob's daughter Tri-City called and asked her dad to come home to see her new puppy. This little girl had been waiting for a puppy for so long. She had always dreamed of becoming a vet. It was possibly either an early Christmas present or an early birthday present, since her birthday is near Christmas. All she wanted that night was to share that happy moment with her daddy. So Rob and Ron drove over to Brenda's house, but when they got there, Brenda was furious. She didn't want Rob to have a friend over, and it was clear she had something planned for that night, using their daughter to lure him into the house. It didn't work because Ron was with Rob, and Brenda refused to let him inside to see the puppy. Here's the sad part. As they were leaving, Rob said something to Ron that gave me chills and made me sick. He said, "You know, it feels like someone has a gun on me all the time. If they do shoot me, I hope they get me with the first shot. I don't want to feel any pain." That same night, Brenda talked to a friend and said, "I hate him. I hate him. I hate him." Ron suggested that Rob was shot with his own weapon, a 16-gauge shotgun. Rob had told Ron that he tried to retrieve the shotgun from their home when Brenda kicked him out, but she wouldn't give it back. The shotgun was never recovered. Brenda had changed the locks and the security codes, so Rob couldn't get back into the house. A week before the murders, Rob had told Ron how Brenda refused to let him in, specifically to retrieve the shotgun. They knew that shotgun was in the house because Higgins, who was doing repairs on the home, had seen it in September 2001 in the bedroom closet. This isn't a coincidence. What's worse is that when all this was happening, Rob made a statement to Ron saying, "Well, she finally found someone to kill me." He was referring to James. When James was asked about his activities on the day of the murders, he said he was moving his washer and dryer. Investigators found that the washer and dryer were moved into Brenda's house, adding another piece to the puzzle. With all this information, it's clear to everyone that James probably didn't kidnap the kids and likely didn't hurt Brenda. In fact, they were almost certain that Brenda and James were fugitives on the run. The last thing Rob ever said to anyone besides Brenda the night he was killed was a message he left on Ron's answering machine around 5:45 p.m. He said he was on his way to pick up his kids for the long holiday weekend and that he was excited. He was heading over to Brenda's to get the children together with his family for the holiday traditions. That evening, he called Ron again around 6 p.m. At that time, he was sitting outside Brenda's house in his car, waiting to pick up the children. Rob and Ron talked for a little while until Rob said, "I'm gonna have to let you go now. They're coming out." It was extremely heartbreaking to know that he was there to pick up his children, whom he would never see again, and that he would never get to say goodbye. This was all detectives needed to know. The FBI got involved and put out wanted posters with descriptions of Brenda, James, and the two children. They were featured on America's Most Wanted and other TV programs asking for the public's help. The fugitives were believed to be armed and dangerous. Investigators went back and reviewed all the evidence again. Everything that they collected led to a new theory. Rob was definitely shot with a 16-gauge shotgun, but conveniently, Brenda wasn't. I don't know if you know this, but a 16-gauge shotgun wound would leave more than a through-and-through wound. It would require significant bandaging and would not allow someone to walk away the same night. This is why police believe the .22 caliber gun was used on Brenda instead of the shotgun. This was done on purpose. They found gunpowder on her pink sweater in the shape of a ring with residue around the bullet hole, indicating it was fired about 2 inches away from Brenda. This means she wasn't running away from a perpetrator. Rather, they think she was holding her arm out and turning away, allowing her new boyfriend to give her a love tap, compared to what Rob suffered that night. Not only that, but when they started examining everything else, they found Brenda's clothing from that night. When they tested the jeans, they found her blood, which was expected, but they also found Rob's blood, which was deep within the fabric. This indicated a high-velocity impact, meaning she was standing very close to Rob. They believe Brenda was responsible for at least one of the wounds to her husband because of where everything took place, right near the furnace. Brenda had already admitted she was trying to get Rob to help her light the pilot light, which had gone out again. They theorized that this was how she got him into the garage under the pretense of needing help with the pilot light. Because Rob was the person he was and still loved his wife more than anything, he was hoping they could get back together. That's another journal entry I'll read to you. This man went in to help, and this is how she repaid him. Now, for a huge break in the case, someone tried to use a debit card or a credit card belonging to James Pavitt at an ATM in Mexico. This was not good news. Investigators knew they truly had fugitives on their hands. This part of Mexico is called Nuevo Laredo, right next to Laredo, Texas, which is the largest entry point into Mexico. Remember that the couple, James and Brenda, took a trip to Texas not too long ago. Maybe this is where the plan came in. Instead of a vacation, they were planning a murder. This is a place where thousands of people cross the border every day. Up to 18,000 trucks pass over the border daily, entering Mexico without being scanned. They are only scanned when they return to the US, at which point the license plate gets scanned. It sounds crazy, but all this was happening on the same day. Investigators worked overtime to track down any clues, especially since children were involved who might never see their family again because they were in another country. They issued a search warrant and entered James's apartment, where they found a name change document, a black book containing a list of weapons and ammunition, and 2.22 caliber bullets. They also discovered that a week before the murder, James had purchased a .22 caliber handgun from a local gun store. The evidence was mounting. On November 29th, James Pavitt and Brenda Andrew were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. This also set other things in motion. Rob's parents, E.R. and Llewellyn, filed for guardianship over the children. Brenda's sister, Kim, and her husband, Jim, also wanted guardianship. Kim was very vocal, insisting her sister had nothing to do with this, that Brenda would never put her children in harm's way, and that James probably acted alone. Kim pleaded with the public to understand that there are two sides to every story. The fact that Brenda had been charged with murder froze her bank account. The money she initially transferred from Rob's account was no longer accessible. The FBI also made it illegal for Brenda, James, and the children to fly anywhere, so they were stuck where they were. They were going to run out of money eventually, and the FBI hoped they would return to the United States. Unfortunately, by December 21st, nothing had changed. The FBI issued a $15,000 reward for any information leading to their arrests. E.R. and Llewellyn were beside themselves, making public pleas and statements to ensure the children's safety. Finally, someone came forward with information. Nobody was expecting this. A woman calls in to investigators and says she thinks she needs to make a confession. She also knows who killed Rob. They ask, how? Who is she? She was the person who made the phone call to Rob about his wife and children being hurt in a terrible accident and told him to rush to the hospital. That was her. She said her dad made her call Rob and say those things. So, who is this woman? It turns out she's the adult daughter of James Pavitt, Jana Larson. She says, I swear I wasn't aware of what my dad was trying to do, because she realizes that she could be facing attempted murder charges. She promises that she had nothing to do with it and did not know her dad was involved in cutting brake lines. She can't believe that her father would put her own life in danger and that she would possibly go to prison because of something he was about to do, something that was so awful, heinous, and illegal. Now that she realizes this was his motive, she's willing to do anything to help the FBI. She provides other information that is very damning and interesting. She says that James asked to borrow her car on the day of the murders, claiming, "Oh, I'm gonna go get your car serviced." How nice. But when he returns the car, it wasn't serviced. When she got inside, she noticed something on the floor, a .22 caliber bullet. She confronted James about this, and her dad said, "Never repeat what I told you in October." So what was that? He came home one day and said, "You're never going to believe what that nuttier-than-a-fruitcake woman asked me to do. She asked me to kill her husband or find somebody who could." He reminded her at that point, "Don't say anything or I'll kill you too." And then he told her to throw away the .22 caliber bullet. When she realizes what her dad was really up to, she tells the FBI. She says that she's already been in contact with her father, who has called her a couple of times, and he's running out of money, just as they thought. So they come up with a plan. They say, "We're gonna tap your phone, and when he calls you next time, we'll try to get him to meet you in Oklahoma so he'll come over the border to get the money." Well, a couple of weeks later, it happens. He calls her up and says he needs some money. But when she suggests coming over to Oklahoma, he's not quite having it, and it doesn't work out. However, they do have him on tape talking to her, and they confirm that he's definitely in Mexico. Sadly, they are still on the run, and probably will be for a very long time because they had a plan in place. They thought they had everything planned out perfectly, so no one would ever know what they did. But all of that changed on February 28, 2002 at 11:55 a.m. For more than 3 months, Tri-City and Parker have been gone. They weren't able to grieve for their father, missed his funeral, and were never able to say goodbye to him. But because of one special agent at the Mexican-Texas border who paid attention to detail, the most incredible thing happened, and I was crying tears of happiness when I read this. It was something the shows never fully explained or gave credit to this person for. It was something I had to read about when I was going through newspapers. Sergeant Special Agent Martin Huerta had actually been activated by the National Guard's Counter-Drug Task Force. He was stationed at the international bridge that links Mexico to Texas and was undercover. He wasn't just a Border Patrol agent, as everyone thought he was. He was there to do secondary searches of vehicles in question that had been targeted by the Border Patrol officers. These vehicles were supposed to be given a more thorough second inspection. Everyone else thought he was just a normal customs agent. Every single hour, he went through about 10 vehicles that could be suspected of carrying drugs across the border. It was a very tedious job. Sometimes he saw so many vehicles that they all started to blend together. But somehow that day, something stood out. Around 11:40, Martin spotted something that caught his attention. He saw a little girl who was crying, her eyes red, looking like she had been crying for a very long time. This was crucial to his job, to make sure that these children weren't being trafficked or kidnapped. Martin looked over and saw a little boy also crying. When he looked at the person driving the minivan, it was a fairly older gentleman who didn't seem to be the children's father. So he stopped the car and searched their bags. Inside the little girl's bag, he found a diary with all kinds of hand-drawn pictures of dogs. It was pretty obvious that she loved dogs. There were dogs on every page in that book. She just kept crying, and he wanted to cheer her up. He asked her, "Do you like dogs?" And she nodded her head yes. So he had an idea. There were these little trading cards that customs officials always have on hand to entertain and distract children during these heavy situations. Some of the cards had Border Patrol dogs on them, talking about the dog's history and career. He thought he'd give her some of these cards to cheer her up. He went over and said, "Do you want to see some dogs?" He started showing her the cards with the dogs on them, but she burst into tears once again, fully bawling her eyes out. However, there was nothing suspicious about the man driving or the vehicle, nothing that could lead Martin to believe anything was out of sorts. So they went on their way. But little did he know that that chance encounter was going to change those children's lives forever. Because he just encountered Tri-City and Parker Andrews with their Uncle Jim Bolin, Brenda's sister's husband. He just didn't know it yet. But 20 minutes later, after the minivan was gone, remember the tag reader I talked about? Well, they registered a hit. It detected an Oklahoma license plate, and the customs agents confirmed that the occupants inside were wanted by the FBI. A beautiful black-haired woman in her 30s, and the slender man in a blue shirt wearing sunglasses. They didn't even resist arrest. Brenda, Andrew, and James Pavitt were finally captured. After they were detained, Martin was called over by his supervisor to get the things out of the vehicle. When he picked up Brenda's purse, the zipper broke and things fell out onto the floor. The purse opened up, revealing other compartments. When he looked inside, he saw a picture and recognized the little girl. He had just seen her in that minivan 20 minutes earlier. He frantically rushed around to find that vehicle. He knew it was a Ford minivan, but couldn't remember the color. All of a sudden, as he was rushing around, he saw the back of the van parked near the entrance of the immigration office. At this point, they had connected that those were Brenda's children. So they went inside, calling out their names. As soon as the children turned around and responded, they ran up and detained Jim Bolin. For the next 3 hours, Martin was with the children, who were crying non-stop. Nothing could stop them from bawling their eyes out. They gave them cookies, drinks, and games, but nothing helped. All they wanted was to see their mom. By 4:30, the FBI had finally taken Brenda and James into custody. They were in jail in Texas, and the children were waiting for their grandparents, E.R. and Llewellyn. It was sad. These grandparents did so much to prepare. They set up rooms in anticipation of getting the children back. They loved them so much. It was the only piece of their son they had left. They are just amazing people. I want to tell you a little more because I was able to find some current and recent information about the children and wanted to share it. But before I do, I want to tell you one thing that Special Agent Martin said. He was proud to have played a role in finding the children, but he was haunted by something he saw in that diary. When he was going through it, he saw that Tri-City had written something to her best friend about her new puppy. The entry was from back in November. He can't exactly remember what she said, but it was before her father was killed. She never wrote in that journal again. That was her last entry. It's hard for me not to become emotional about that. It's like her world ended for her at that point. She had nothing to write about. Both Brenda and James waived extradition and were back in Oklahoma within 10 days of being detained. District Attorney Wes Lane decided to seek the death penalty against both of them. I wanted to know what you thought about this part because it's actually pretty controversial. I want to know about everything I've told you, but what are your thoughts specifically about the death penalty being on the table in this case? The police released photographs of the severed brake lines and even the tape of the phone calls. All this information went out to the media as they geared up for the trial. Brenda denied any involvement. She pled not guilty, and James did as well. They were both denied bail. And you know what else came out? Remember how the children were with Jim Bolin, Kim's husband, Brenda's sister's husband? Well, guess what? The prosecutors say Kim was waiting in a motel room in McAllen, Texas, for them to arrive. They think she might have had something to do with helping Brenda get away with this. Can you remember back to when Kim also made that phone call to the police saying, "Oh, don't worry, Brenda's fine," and then, "Sorry, I made a mistake. Never mind. I don't know where she is." Kinda sketchy. I'm not going to go into details about this trial because it was long and crazy. And there were so many things that came out, like the fact that years before this, Judy had given Brenda a key to her house. Brenda had forgotten about it, so they think Brenda gave that key to James, and James used it to get into that house to hide after committing the crime. So many people testified. That's where I got a lot of this information because I read through all of the trial documents. The men that she had affairs with were at the trial, testifying, along with family members, friends, and co-workers. The list goes on and on. There were 2 separate trials. James's trial, which happened 1 year before Brenda's, was a 3-week trial, and they reached a verdict of murder in the first degree with a fixed punishment of death. Brenda's trial was highly publicized and garnered national media attention, mostly because statistically, it's men who commit these kinds of crimes, and Brenda was a woman. It was a big deal. The media saw it as a really good story. Love, religion, sex, and lies. It was like a Lifetime movie or something. They had handwriting experts for all kinds of things. Remember the insurance documents that were faxed over and then backdated to March? Brenda would always brag to her friends that she could sign Rob's signature just as well as he could, and that she would sign documents for him all the time for work. However, he started using a little symbol. I'll show it to you on the screen. It's a little fish symbol, a Christian symbol. He began placing this symbol right under his signature. When they analyzed the insurance documents, this symbol was missing. So, those documents were forged. The prosecution believes Brenda did this for money and because she didn't want to lose custody of her children. After a 6-week trial, Brenda was found guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, and she was also sentenced to death. She is currently awaiting execution on death row. However, I want to mention one last point before I tell you something about Tri-City. There is some controversy here. This case was sexual in nature, and I say that because much of the evidence that the prosecution submitted was about Brenda's character, not evidence of her being present when the crime was committed. Yes, they had some evidence of that as well, but what they had more of was evidence of her affairs. As a matter of fact, there is an article I read called "Sex Shamed to Death," where they think Brenda got the death penalty because she was a promiscuous woman. The prosecution's closing arguments were interesting to say the least. They brought out a suitcase that Brenda had taken to Mexico and opened it up. One by one, they pulled out pairs of thong underwear, asking, "Does this look like the underwear of a grieving wife? Does this look like the underwear of a woman who loved her husband and wouldn't have an affair with one of his best friends?" They went through it all, lingerie and whatever else was in there. The point was to create shock value and make her look like a terrible woman and wife who didn't care about Rob whatsoever. But it was also argued that this had nothing to do with the fact that she was on trial for murder. Yes, she could be promiscuous and a cheater, but that doesn't make her a murderer. When Brenda made her appeal, those were the things that were included. They were evidence to prove maybe she wasn't a Christian woman, but they weren't really supposed to be evidence proving she committed murder. By the way, James isn't on death row. His death sentence was commuted. That's right, when he appealed, his sentence was reduced to life in prison. He alleged he didn't have a fair trial because there was a person who confessed to shooting Rob, Tyrone Wood. There was a letter from Tyrone that was never introduced into evidence. Due to the way his counsel did or did not submit certain things, his sentence was commuted to life. In 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Brenda's appeal. Last time I checked, there were only 42 people awaiting death in Oklahoma, and Brenda was the only woman I could find. Now I want to end on a positive note. Tri-City has grown into an amazing woman. After graduating high school, she attended the University of Tulsa in 2009, where she graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics, with minors in biology and business administration. She went on to achieve her master's degree in applied mathematics from North Carolina State University, and then she graduated in June 2020 with her PhD in applied mathematics. That's amazing. She was active in the Association for Women in Mathematics and held roles as president, vice president, and treasurer. So, Rob, I think you got your wish. I'm sure somehow, somewhere, there was a button or a sticker or a sign that said electricity. Even though her father couldn't be there in the flesh, he was there walking down the aisle with her in spirit, because a picture of him and her together was tied to the bouquet. I spent hours looking through her Facebook. I feel like I got to know this family, and I have so much respect for Rob's parents. They're still together and have raised wonderful children. We want success, love, and happiness, but what happens when things don't go as planned? When truth becomes lies and revenge seems better when you're bitter? I would like to introduce you to Nyla Franklin. Nyla was born to a biochemist and businessman, Lee Franklin and Maria Manor, on April 12, 1979. Nyla was the center of attention from the day she was born. While still at the hospital, she became a very popular newborn. All the nurses all over Highland Park Hospital heard she was born with so much hair they had to come and see it for themselves. They would stop by Maria's room to catch a glimpse, and some of them even tried stopping them when they were leaving the hospital just to get one last look. She really was a blessing to her family. The family lived in Chicago, Illinois, and Nyla grew up in a very loving family. They were involved in their children's lives. Her mother and father did get divorced, but they both continued to be involved with every child. Nyla's father spent time with Nyla every weekend and all summer. Nyla loved her family and was very close to everyone, especially her mother. Maria called Nyla her good luck charm. She said that everything she touched seemed to turn to gold. Nyla wasn't the only child. She had 4 sisters and a brother. Some of her siblings were half-siblings, and some of them were full siblings. However, they didn't differentiate themselves, they just called everyone sister or brother. I'm also from a blended family. The firstborn was Nyla's sister, Leah, who was 9 years older. She was like a second mother to all of the siblings. She got to watch each and every one of them grow up to be bright, well-rounded, and successful individuals, all with their own gifts. The siblings consisted of Leah, then Nyla, followed by Marina, who was born in May 1986. There were actually 2 girls named Ashley, born back-to-back, only a year apart, one Ashley with 2 E's at the end, and one Ashley with a Y. The youngest sibling was their brother John. They are a very talented family, each one of them having their own gifts that their mother and father cultivated and supported. Leah received a scholarship to Notre Dame, and she lives in San Francisco, California, with her husband and her 2 daughters. She's a marketing manager and an owner of a public relations firm. We're going to hear a lot about Leah in this story. Marina is actually a comedian and a pretty well-known one. She's an actress and a writer. Ashley with a Y is a nurse in Illinois with a family of her own. The other Ashley is a social worker. Each one of these women is beautiful and talented in their own ways. They look like such a loving and close-knit family, but what happens next really tears them apart. Nyla's younger siblings really looked up to her. It was her confidence, her intelligence, her go-getter attitude, and her caring heart. She would also tell it like it is. She wouldn't sugarcoat anything. So if you really wanted to know if the guy you were dating was a catch, she would be the first one to point out the red flags. She was as generous as she was blunt. Her family was her #1 priority. She was the first one that her sisters would turn to if they needed advice on anything. Nyla's grandmother, well, that was one of her heroes, and her nickname was Moot, because of the fact she argued so well and would usually win every argument. So arguing back with her was pretty much a moot point. Nyla was walking in her footsteps. She was only 5'2" and weighed 110 pounds, but she could hold her own. She just had that air about her, and you would forget that she was as tiny as she was. Leah, her oldest sister, said that in the summer of 1991 she was turning 21, and Nyla was only 12. You wouldn't know that she was just a child, because she would talk like an adult and have grown-up conversations. People were shocked. She was so well-spoken. She would ask people what they were doing in their lives, and she would keep up with every word. Even though she had this quiet little voice, she was bold, headstrong, and beautiful. Ashley with a Y grew up in the same house as Nyla, and they kind of had a little sibling rivalry, things that you would look back on later in life and laugh about. And that's exactly what they did. Nyla would mess with Ashley all the time. She would do things like tell her that her Barbie's hair would grow back if she cut it all off. And of course, Ashley trusted her, but then did it and found out it wouldn't grow back. To get a little revenge, she would take pages out of Nyla's notebook and tear them out. Ooh, that made her pretty mad because she put so much effort into her schoolwork. Ashley would also purposely embarrass Nyla, especially when her friend Dana would call the house. Ashley would tell her that Nyla just ate and now she was doing #2. All in good fun, of course. But then, when Nyla left for college, Ashley was super sad. She couldn't stand being away from her. And as they got older, they became closer and closer. Nyla wanted to be involved with everything, from her sister's education to her goals, and even the guys that she dated, because she wanted to know that her sisters were being treated well. You can tell she took her relationships very seriously, and the same goes for her friendships. She kept in touch with her friends throughout her life, with one of her best friends being Dana. They talked and saw each other on a regular basis. She was a go-getter from a young age, very strong-willed, self-assured, and confident. That was one big reason she was so successful throughout her life. When I first saw Nyla's face, I couldn't stop thinking about her smile, and just how unexpected everything that happened was. How this could happen to anyone. And I know that I say that in some of my videos, but that's the truth. This could happen to anyone. It can happen to you, it could happen to me, your loved ones, and it can happen so fast without warning. After Nyla graduated from high school, she studied at one of the top universities, the University of Illinois at Urbana. She graduated with a degree in advertising, then took her first job after college in 2001 as an assistant advertising executive at Leo Burnett. She worked there for 5 years, then decided to take a chance and apply for a coveted sales position in an entirely different profession with a major pharmaceutical company called Eli Lilly in Chicago. She landed the job as a pharmaceutical rep. Nyla really wanted to have a financially lucrative career, and she believed this was the path to get her there. Between the time that she spent traveling to different doctors' offices, meeting with the physicians, and providing samples of medications on the market throughout her designated territory around Illinois, she also enjoyed interior decorating. She was good at it. It started when she helped her ex-boyfriend decorate his home. Now she had paying clients lining up to use her skills. She was making a really good salary, had so much to look forward to, and so many aspirations. She was really just getting started in life. This story and everything that unfolds happened when Nyla was 28 years old. She seemingly had it all: talent, money, and a lot of connections. There wasn't a lack of lavish parties, upscale nightclubs, and fine dining. Lots of fun. Oh, and there definitely wasn't a lack of men in Nyla's life either. However, she did have high standards, as she should. She's an amazing person. She would be a gift to anyone. Her beauty, plus her smile, were magnetic, not to mention her charismatic personality. It just drew people in. She wanted someone who was either equal or would challenge her. She dated men with wealth and status, and she had a type: handsome, educated, intelligent, and successful. She dated plastic surgeons, lawyers, you name it. Not too long before this, in May of 2006, she landed a handsome, successful 28-year-old real estate investor named Reginald Potts. She wasn't the only one with her eye on him, and he wasn't hard to miss. He strutted around in his designer clothes, Gucci shoes, 3-piece suits, totally decked out. To top it off, he drove a $225,000 white Bentley, and he let everyone know about it. Yep, that'll do it. He was very popular in the groups that Nyla socialized with, known as the most eligible bachelor living in a penthouse suite at 111 South Wabash. Alright, I have to show you an example of what this place looks like. It's in the heart of the South Loop overlooking the harbor. This isn't his exact condo, but I had to show you a similar one. Just look at it. It's spacious, has so much natural light coming in, and is high above the city. Luxury living for sure. It's exactly the type of place I'd imagine a man like Reginald living in. I'll go ahead and let the slideshow keep playing for a minute in case you want to see more. So that gives you a pretty good idea why women wanted to be in Reginald's life and on his arm. Because he was quite a catch. It wasn't a surprise that he and Nyla connected, but she was just as desirable to men. She may not have been driving a Bentley, but she was successful in her own right. She also had a luxury condo. In fact, it was only 10 minutes away from Reginald's place. Hers was at University Village condominiums. To be fair, I have to show you an example of what her place looked like. It's so pretty. Now this is not her actual condominium, just an example. It's not as high up above the city as Reginald's place, but it still has those skyline views. Beautiful and cozy fireplace, sleek white quartz countertops, and again that natural light. Nice little balcony to enjoy the views. Now you can see Nyla loving it here. So it's true she wasn't driving around a Bentley, but she did have a nice black Chevy Impala that her company paid for. It was easy for Nyla and Reginald to be drawn to one another, and it wasn't long before they started seeing each other more frequently. You could say they were quite a power couple. It was a fun, intense relationship with a lot of chemistry, and they enjoyed nice dinners, going to parties, and hooking up together. But, like many of these really intense relationships, they tend to fizzle out, and that's exactly what happened between Reginald and Nyla. As it turned out, this just wasn't a forever thing. Besides, Nyla had met someone new, so she decided to officially break it off with Reginald in July of 2007. That meant she was free to explore this new relationship with a handsome gentleman named Andre Wright. He certainly lived up to his name because he was Mr. Right in Nyla's eyes. Andre is a successful lawyer. He's educated, sophisticated, kind, and generous. They met while they were attending an art gallery opening, and their connection was instant. They really enjoyed each other's company, and Andre treated Nyla better than the other men she had dated in the past. It didn't take long before they were in a serious relationship. The only thing keeping them a little bit apart was that he was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the time, so they had a long-distance relationship. However, they would both travel to see one another on a frequent basis, and with technology, the distance wasn't an issue. Their relationship grew, even though there were miles between them. It was worth it for both of them to put in the work because they cared about their future, and they were even talking about moving in together. They would do weekend trips away with each other to keep the flame burning and the passion alive. And when they were apart, they would text each other all day long. In September, they had been dating exclusively for 3 months. Andre had even met Nyla's family, and Leah liked him right away because they met at Leah's daughter's first birthday. She was pleasantly surprised when Andre took it upon himself to pick out a special gift for Leah's daughter's big day. Now that you know a lot about Nyla, her personality, lifestyle, boyfriend, and who she was, I want to go to the weekend before Tuesday, September 18th, 2007. That was the weekend of Friday the 14th through Sunday the 16th. They had a fun weekend together, as usual. She went to see Andre at his place in Milwaukee, and on the 16th they attended a wedding for one of Andre's friends. Then, Nyla went back to Chicago. The work week was progressing as usual until Tuesday the 18th. The couple kind of had a ritual. Every morning Andre would call Nyla, not as a wake-up call, but as a good morning call. And she came to expect it every morning to start her day. That Tuesday, Andre was a lot busier than usual, and it totally slipped his mind because it was so routine. He actually thought he already called her. However, he had forgotten, and instead, Nyla called him, asking, "Where's my morning call?" He apologized, but she wasn't mad at him, she was just teasing him. So they had a little chit-chat and then went about their morning, keeping in touch by emailing each other back and forth as usual. Around noon, Nyla calls into work, telling them that she's going to take the rest of the day off as a personal day. Perhaps she needed some rest because she had traveled over the weekend. Being tired was to be expected because she had a very fast-paced job. She was always at different doctors' offices, giving them samples of medicines and pharmaceutical products, and then driving all over the city. Even though she was busy and took her job very seriously, she made it a point to always be available for the people she cared about, especially her sisters. Like many of us, she always had her phone on her. She wouldn't just text you back either, she would pick it up and call you. She kept in touch with her family non-stop, and she was even known to jump right out of the shower to answer a call from them. After Andre got off work, he called her as usual, but she didn't answer. So he left a message saying, "Hey, I'm heading home. Call me back when you get this." A little while later, he got a text message back from her that said, "Hey, I'll reach out later. I'm at dinner," which was a little unusual. It was out of character because normally Andre would be aware of what Nyla's plans were. She would also answer the phone no matter what she was doing, where she was going, or who she was with. A few hours later, when he was settling in for the evening, he tried calling her again, but she failed to answer. This concerned him. She was a woman of her word. If she said she was going to call you back, she did. Maybe she was tired and fell asleep, so Andre went to bed expecting to pick up their conversation as usual the next morning on Wednesday, September 19th. But again, she didn't answer. He emailed her in all caps saying, "Are you alive?" He's half joking, but he's concerned. We've probably all said that, like, "Are you alive? Where are you?" Or you've responded, "I'm alive." Well, something else was happening that morning when Nyla's older sister Leah, who was a PR executive, got into her office. Her phone was ringing. When she picked it up, there was a man on the other end. He introduced himself as Nyla's boss, and he informed Leah that Nyla never showed up for work. She had a meeting with him that day, and he wanted to know if Leah had heard from her. She hadn't, and she knew something was wrong right away. There's no way that her sister would miss a work meeting. Leah tried to think of reasons why Nyla wouldn't have at least called in to let her boss know. Leah calls her sister Ashley, and that's when she finds out that Ashley attempted to get in touch with Nyla, just like Andre did the night before. Ashley had texted Nyla that evening and got the same exact text that Andre received, that she was at dinner and would reach back out later. They both thought that was really off, so they reached out to Andre. He told them the same story, that he never got back in touch with her because she never called him. That's when they started calling around. The more people they spoke to, the more concerned they got because no one could reach Nyla. By the end of that night, her phone was going straight to voicemail. Leah goes down to the Chicago Police Department and files a missing persons report. But when she does, like in many of the cases we've heard before, they tell her, you know what? Don't get worried yet. She's an adult. She could have things going on in her life that you don't know about. She might not have time to reach out. Don't jump to conclusions. But the family just knew better. They just knew. They had that gut feeling, and sometimes it's right. None of this seemed normal because they knew their family member better than some random police officer. The police officers insisted that Nyla would turn up, saying most adults that go missing turn up, so don't stress, she probably went on vacation. No, she would never do that. If she needed to get away, even from her own family, she would let them know. Remember, she's pretty blunt. Her family wasn't going to wait around for the police. Leah started right away. Remember how she's a PR executive? She knows how to get the buzz around a story. She didn't wait a second to get her sister's story out there. She called every media contact that she had and begged them to spread the word. I listened to an interview with Leah, and she said something really important that I wanted to share. She said, "Quite frankly, I don't know a lot of women of color or people of color who get the same attention by the public in general." The interviewer responded by saying, "The good-looking young blonde goes missing, and the whole world wants to know about it, and they stay talking about it for years. It's not the same for black women." Leah agreed, saying, "There's a reality to that. It troubles the mind that when people of color go missing, or it doesn't fit a certain narrative, somehow it's not real." Leah's media savvy definitely paid off because the next morning, guess what? Nyla's picture was all over the news. She got the attention of the public. The family was already out on the streets. Friends were helping. They were putting out flyers, taping them to poles, and handing them out to people on the street that were walking by. Meanwhile, Dana and Leah went to Nyla's condo. They knocked, but no one answered. Her condo was locked, which they said was unusual, and that surprised me. I would assume it would be unusual if it wasn't locked. But Leah was able to get a key. When she stepped inside, something seemed wrong. The place was in somewhat of a disarray, which was not like Nyla. There were eggs and coffee on the countertop, which weren't put away. Additionally, she could tell Nyla's business-issued laptop, her personal laptop, and her iPad were missing. Her cell phone wasn't there either, and her car was not parked in the usual parking spot in the garage. So where is she? What happened? Dana also knew the passcode to Nyla's voicemail, and we're going to go into detail about that later, but I can tell you there is definitely something significant about Nyla's voice messages. 3 whole days go by, and they're still searching. At this point, police are beginning to take the search seriously. Andre decides to fly in to join them, and everyone's hoping they will locate Nyla. Now, you probably know from watching a lot of true crime cases that the first person they're going to look at is the boyfriend. And indeed, they brought him in for questioning. He told them exactly what we already know, that they saw each other over the weekend, that he talked to her briefly on Tuesday, and that he hadn't heard back from her at all since then. Everyone had kind things to say about Nyla. There were no red flags when it came to Andre's interview. So the next thing the police do is check her phone records. Even though they don't physically have her phone, they can look at her phone records to get an idea of who she was talking to last. What phone calls did she make or take? The investigators were doing everything they could, even interviewing her doctors, retracing her steps anywhere she had been in the last month or so, and talking to everyone that knew her or anyone that had a relationship with her whatsoever. After all the publicity, Anonymous tips started flooding in, but none of them led anywhere. When the police subpoenaed Nyla's phone records, they got their first significant lead. They discovered suspicious messages sent from her phone to Andre, her friend Devin, and her sister Ashley between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. These messages didn't sound anything like her. Her co-workers also received text messages that day that made no sense, discussing work locations she was supposed to be at but wasn't. The investigators traced a number she called, which led them to a restaurant. They found out that someone, presumably a man, called and made a dinner reservation under the last name Franklin, which was Nyla's last name. However, no one showed up for that reservation. Even more out of character were a series of text messages sent to one of Nyla's ex-boyfriends, Brent, around 7:30 p.m. The texts were completely random. Then Brent received a call from her. He could barely hear her. There was so much wind, static, or noise in the background. All he heard was, "Hello, hello, can you hear me?" before the call disconnected. A few seconds later, another call came in from her, but it was immediately disconnected as well. When Brent tried calling back, it went straight to her voicemail. The most disturbing lead uncovered by the police were 3 calls made from Nyla's phone at 10:15 p.m. the night she went missing. These calls were made to 911. All 911 calls are recorded, even if no one speaks. And that's exactly what happened in this case. All that could be heard was what sounded like music playing in the background. By 11:05 p.m., all incoming calls to Nyla's phone were going directly to voicemail, and no outgoing calls were made again. Reading about all this, it's natural to wonder if this was related to a mental health issue. With the stress at work, a recent breakup, a new relationship, and all the traveling, it wouldn't be uncommon for someone to exhibit unusual behavior when they're overwhelmed. However, Nyla's family seemed very close and would likely have noticed if something was seriously wrong. Her sisters, in particular, were very close to her, so the idea that she was hiding something like that seemed unlikely. The second thought was that someone else had her phone, someone who was making those calls and sending those messages. But who? Did she make that dinner reservation and just never show up because something happened to her that night? Did she try to call her ex for help? It was all a mystery, but some of that mystery was beginning to unravel. In Calumet City, Illinois, about 25 miles outside of Chicago, a police officer was making his rounds through a golf course parking lot. It was just an ordinary night, and he was checking to ensure everything was secure. That's when he saw something strange in the distance. At first, it looked like a stack of cardboard shipping boxes along the curb, so he assumed it was garbage. He parked his patrol car and walked over to take a closer look. The boxes were filled with prescription drugs, hundreds of pills, not in bottles, but in small sample packs. The officer thought it might be evidence of a narcotics-related crime. Perhaps there had been a robbery at a doctor's office, and the thieves had to leave some boxes behind because they couldn't carry them all. Regardless, he knew he needed to take the boxes back to the station for processing. As he was logging the contents later, he noticed a label on one of the boxes with an address and a name, Nyla Franklin. He ran the name and discovered she was a missing person out of Chicago. He immediately contacted the detectives handling Nyla's case. They quickly realized that these prescription samples belonged to her. Now they had to figure out why they ended up 25 miles away from where she lived. This discovery marked a turning point in the investigation. Whenever something related to a missing person is found, but not the person themselves, it's usually a bad sign. The detectives and FBI wasted no time and began searching the area around where the boxes were found, hoping to uncover more clues about what had happened to Nyla. In Calumet City, this is not a bustling area. It's secluded, near a few rundown abandoned businesses. They had a Long John Silver's, I'm going to show it on the screen, a relic of a VideoMax video rental store, kind of like Blockbuster, and an Outback Steakhouse that was adjacent to the River Oaks golf course. These businesses were no longer there on Google Maps, just the Outback Steakhouse and the golf course. But you can see that the parking lot abuts the lagoon, and this lagoon wraps around this entire area. Here's an aerial view and some shots from the street view. It's a highly wooded area, a forest preserve with tall grass and swampy, murky water. As the detectives are making their way to where the shipping boxes were found, they find themselves standing in front of a somewhat steep embankment that drops down into the woods and leads right into the water. They're probably thinking what you're thinking, what I was thinking. Is this where we're going to find something bad? Maybe Nyla? They used their flashlights because they wanted to shed some light in that area. And here's a few pictures. Now, in these pictures it's winter, but when this was happening it was hot. They made the decision that they're going to dredge the lagoon. They had divers in there searching, as well as police and FBI combing this entire area, all around the buildings, the parking lot, through all the brush. And by the end of the day, as night was falling, they found yet another piece of evidence. Jewelry, specifically earrings, a bracelet, and a pearl necklace, which had been broken. Some of the beads were on the ground, and some of them remained on a string that was hanging from a branch. I'm going to show you in this picture. This is not a good sign at all. The cops brought these items to her friends to try to identify them, and they said, yeah, it looks like items that belong to Nyla. Shocking. It's unbelievable. I can't imagine the thoughts that would be going through my head if I were looking at jewelry that I know belongs to someone I care about. You don't know what to think, but your mind tends to think of the worst-case scenario. Why would her jewelry be on bushes if she wasn't running through there for her life? Did she take them off and place them there so that people would know that she had been in that area? More mysteries. They scoured every inch of that area, including the lagoon, and they did not find anything except for that jewelry. The family is getting more eager to get the word out. With Leah and her PR expertise, they're distributing more flyers, knocking on doors, rallying around to bring awareness. Once again, it pays off because another important clue comes in, maybe the most important tip that they had gotten besides the jewelry. Someone called in a tip about a car. They had been watching the news and they saw a picture of a car that was said to belong to Nyla, the black Chevy Impala. They said that there was a similar car parked down the street from them. It was just a block down the road. This person is calling from Hammond, Indiana. Yes, another state, but Indiana borders Illinois. Calumet City is close to that Indiana border, and sure enough, the car was identified as Nyla's. This part was sad. Nyla's sister, Ashley, runs over there as fast as she can. The car was parked in front of a completely abandoned house, and even though she knew that no one was inside, she was determined to figure out what happened to Nyla. So she just kept banging on this door, peering through all the windows and crying and crying. She would not leave. She had to be physically removed because she didn't want to leave the last place she knew her sister had been. It was way too emotional. They had to drag her away. The detectives do a walk around the vehicle, checking to see if there's anything unusual, if anything's broken, if there were any visible fingerprints, any blood, and they don't see anything. Now, of course, they have to do what no investigator looks forward to. They have to open the trunk. They know that one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to open the trunk and find Nyla, either dead or alive, and their search is going to be over, there's going to be closure, or not. They might find nothing, which would be the best case scenario, but it doesn't actually mean it's a positive thing. It means that they have their work cut out for them. But it's time to pop the trunk. They look inside, and they don't find anything. At this point, there's still hope, and her family is holding out hope that she is still alive. But it's not looking good. It looks like there's been foul play. She could have been taken and brought somewhere. The next step is to examine the entire vehicle to see if there's any trace evidence inside. And guess what? They found nothing. The entire car had been wiped clean. What gave away the fact that the car had been wiped, as opposed to it just not having fingerprints left behind, was the fact that they found tiny fibers in various locations, which came from either a cloth or clothing, considering the fact that the car was found in the area. That was a straight shot from where they found the boxes, just 3 miles away. They knew this was probably going to be where they found Nyla, somewhere between these two locations, that is, if she's no longer alive. On September 22nd, officers from both Calumet City and Hammond, Indiana, began searching those areas for any signs of Nyla. They looked at her phone records and were able to confirm that her phone pinged off 2 towers, one in Hammond, the other in Calumet City. They attempted to confirm with Eli Lilly whether this was part of Nyla's territory, a place where she would have been doing business, but her partner Molly said no, that was not part of her route. While the evidence technicians were going through the trunk of Nyla's car, which was in Desiree by the way, they stumbled upon a Remy Martin advertisement card, sort of like a promotional business card. Remy Martin is a type of alcohol, so they never really knew whether something was of significance, but they did feel it was a little out of place. So they kept it in the forefront of their minds, and of course collected everything, and made sure to take notes, that it could be something significant. In this case, it did become something significant, because while they were investigating the lagoon area, they found another Remy Martin card, just like the one they found in the trunk. The second card was found between the lagoon and the golf course parking lot, near an Outback Steakhouse. They're starting to pinpoint a connection between the golf course parking lot and where the boxes were found, and Nyla's car. After 5 days of searching the entire stretch of land between these locations of interest, they did not find Nyla. The search started to become very personal for one of the officers. Remember the officer who stumbled upon the boxes? Well, his name's Calvin. He had friends in common with Nyla. Their high schools were close by and they graduated around the same time, lots of mutual friends. He had been helping with the search, and he could feel her family's pain. That's why he and a colleague decided to go out to the lagoon, where they found the jewelry, around 4 o'clock in the morning after their shift was over on September 22nd. They wanted to take a look for themselves. They walked all around the bank of the lagoon, and then they walked through the brush, just looking for anything that was out of place, anything they could have missed. I'm going to put a pause on this search because I want to go back to Nyla's voice messages. Remember when I told you that her friend Dana had access to her voicemail on her phone? Well, the real reason she was trying to get in there was because there was a message she wanted to play for the police. It was a message that Nyla had supposedly let her hear, and it was very disturbing. However, when she went to look for it, it was deleted, so she couldn't provide it to the police. She couldn't prove it was real. This was all supposed memory, but she said it was pretty nasty. She told police that Nyla was afraid and said, "If anything happens to me, give the police my email login information." What is going on? Who was this voicemail from? Why would they need her email login? Why would that be important? Then another clue comes in. It's from a neighbor on the same street where the car was found. They say they saw a skinny black male walking around that car the night of September 18th, and then he left in a different vehicle. There were 2 males in Nyla's recent past and present that matched that description. Her current boyfriend, Andre, and her recent ex-boyfriend from just a few months ago, Reginald Potts. You know, the one that drives the white Bentley and lives in that nice condo I showed you? We haven't heard about him in a while. They feel it's time to bring him in for some questioning, especially because Dana tells the police that was the person who left the nasty message on Nyla's voicemail. They ask Dana what was going on between Nyla and Reginald. Dana said at some point, when they were seeing each other, Nyla had suspicions that he might be cheating on her. The cops were interested, but it's not a crime to cheat on someone. It's important, but it doesn't mean it has anything to do with her disappearance. However, Dana insisted they take a deeper look. She explained it all started when they were at a party together. One of Nyla's friends knew that she was dating Reginald. They came up to her and said, "You know that guy? He's not who you think he is." That bothered her as much as it offended her, and she thought the woman might just be jealous. She wanted to know more. She already had this sneaking suspicion that something wasn't right. She just didn't have any confirmation. Being a curious person and wanting to get to the bottom of it, like many of us do, she decided to have one of her friends do a background check. She was devastated by what she found, and she was angry. She felt like she had been lied to. She found out he had a criminal record. Now, A criminal record in and of itself doesn't mean that a person is necessarily a bad person, but it can raise some red flags. You want to know who you're dating. There are plenty of people who have been arrested, but what did he do, and should she be afraid of him? It's her choice whether she wanted to date someone who had been arrested or had a criminal record. Maybe not. She had to dig deeper and find out exactly what he was involved in, and whether or not he was actively trying to hide it from her. Some people lie by omission. They think, hey, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to tell anyone I've committed a crime or anything, especially if they did their time or if it was far in the past. But she wondered if she were to ask him, would he admit it or would he try to conceal it? Back to the investigation, they had ruled Andre out at this time because he had an alibi. He wasn't even in the state. He was nowhere near Nyla at the time she disappeared. Now they moved on and wanted to interview Reginald. I'm gonna warn you, this is going to get deep. It's very convoluted. As much as I say I love details, dare I say this is a little bit too detailed and kind of confusing, but I'm gonna try to break it down as simply as I can because all of this is important. I believe details are the most important parts of these cases, because it's how everything gets unfolded. It's all the twists and turns that connect things, and that is what I find to be so interesting, but also so scary and frightening. Were there signs? What was happening? Do we really know the people in our lives? That's what I'm about to explain. Reginald, without hesitation, goes down to the Chicago Police Department and agrees to talk to them. He tells them everything, how they met last year, and it was by chance on a street in the ritzy Gold Coast. Nyla was beautiful, sophisticated, and classy. They briefly dated, but they weren't right for each other, and their relationship ended back in July. They were seeing other people, and everything was fine. The police want to know where he was on September 18th. He gives them a recap of his day. He was hanging out with friends. He says he went grocery shopping, made a trip to a Target store, and went out on a couple of dates. He went out with 2 of his girlfriends. Did he have more? I don't know, so I guess the cheating story was true. He had everything right. Why not? Every girl? Definitely a ladies' man. He was most likely cheating when he was with Nyla. She wasn't wrong to assume that he was living a double life. Her friend was right. He wasn't who she thought he was. But that doesn't mean he had anything to do with her disappearance. However, it definitely didn't mean he was Mr. Perfect, like she initially thought he was. Police asked Reginald why the relationship with Nyla ended. Like, you have 3 girlfriends now. Did you have multiple girlfriends when you were seeing Nyla? He admitted he did. He said, from his point of view, his relationship with her was purely sexual, and it fell apart after one of her friends told her that he could be cheating. After she began digging into his life, she uncovered that one of the girls he was dating was pregnant. He was keeping secrets. Police questioned him about whether he was still in contact with Nyla, and he said yes, that they do communicate every now and then, and he was even in contact with her that month. So now the police are even more interested. They asked, who was this other woman that was having your baby or had your baby? And he's like, which one? Because it turns out he'd also been married, another thing he might have been hiding. He had an ex-wife, her name was Natalia, and he had 2 daughters with her, Amaya and Aya. They got married in 2005, just a year before he met Nyla. So this is starting to get pretty interesting now. It doesn't mean that he's guilty of anything except being a douchebag. But we're starting to see something going on here. I think it's important because you don't know who you're getting involved with. Natalia and Reginald had their first daughter a few years before they got married, and they had their second daughter right before they broke up. That was in December of 2005. Reginald moved from Naperville to Chicago. That's how he ended up in Chicago. He said he was still involved in his children's lives and that he visited them and maintained contact with their mother, Natalia. Then he explains he started dating the other woman in March of 2006. That was the woman that Nyla found out was pregnant. Their daughter was born not too long ago, in June of 2007, a month before Jima and Nyla split up. These women are important in this story. It's not for nothing that I'm going into detail about them. So this woman, that was pregnant. Her name is Ina, and Ina was living with her parents. Ina and Reginald were actually looking for a home together. He was a real estate investor and she worked for a real estate company. They were interested in developing some of their own properties, including a condo in University Village, which is the same condo complex that Nyla lived in. However, this was a very prominent and popular area, so if you are in real estate, you know that it's not really that much of a red flag or anything. It's just one more thing that correlates. Reginald actually met Nyla when he was already dating Ina. He was cheating. He had an ex-wife, he was going through a divorce with 2 kids, and he had a baby on the way. I don't think Nyla knew any of that. The cops wanted to know a little bit more about his interest in the University Village property. He says he's always looking for properties to invest in. He even admitted that he visits those condominiums on a pretty regular basis and was looking to purchase one that same month. He had visited that location a number of times in September. Not really that unusual, but something to think about. It raised some red flags because they were like, okay, he was around that area. Was he there on the day that Nyla went missing? Let's dig into this a little further. Meanwhile, they started to investigate his background. They wanted to find out about the women he was dating, especially the ones that went on a date with him the night that Nyla disappeared. During his alibi, he gave them a name of a woman, Nancy Moreno. Nancy confirmed that Reginald was looking for a University Village condominium. She owned one of the properties that was up for sale, and he did come by that property twice in September. One of those times he was with a woman, which presumably was his girlfriend, Ina. Nancy unfortunately did not have the exact dates, but this did link him to being in that area in September. So the police go back and interview some of Nyla's friends about Reginald. They say that Nyla found him to be pretty arrogant, and that's why she was drawn to Andre. He was so much more respectful to her. Once she found someone better, she was able to move on, but it was hard. She still remained in contact with Reginald, and they asked why. There's one simple reason: he's a good-looking guy. He's kind of the one that got away. Maybe she would have stayed with him if he wasn't all of those things, a liar, a cheater. But sometimes people with that lifestyle do those things. He's living his life doing whatever he wants, and that's really tough. We've probably all known someone like that, someone that you want you the way that you want them, and they just don't. So there's all this push and pull and drama. Sometimes they're nice, sometimes they're just lonely, and vice versa. So it's true they were no longer in a relationship, but they were keeping in touch. As a matter of fact, when police are going through Nyla's email, they find one entitled Adios. That email was sent from Nyla to Reginald on July 16th, 2007. This is when they broke up, or at least for the final time. It seems like, from the email, Nyla had already tried to remove him from her life several times, but there was just something about him, something that kept her coming back. There's no way to know exactly what somebody else's relationship was like because we're not living it, but from the email, we can get a glimpse into the way that Nyla felt. She explained in that email that she had tried, like I said, several times to remove him from her life, but somehow he always managed to slip back in. Now she finally had to put it to an end. She wanted to stop all communication. She told him she was very disappointed that he treated the relationship like a game. She called him deeply disrespectful. He constantly flirted with her friends and was obsessed to a point of being pathological over these seemingly insignificant things. He was selfish. He only cared about himself and about money, the money he was so focused on making. And it gets worse. She wrote, "Since the first day we met, you and your life have been nothing but lies." She said that he never told her about his jail time or his criminal history. He constantly lied and made up stories about where he was and what he was doing, and the fact that he probably had other girlfriends the whole time they were together. But the most disturbing thing of all was his refusal to acknowledge the existence of his own children. She ended the email by telling him she never wanted to hear from him again, and if her impulses ever led her to call him, that he should not answer. That if that happened, it didn't mean anything. It was just a slip of the brain. So now you can kind of understand where she was coming from when they broke up back in July of 2007. He was one of those people that could kind of charm his way back and worm his way back in. He was good looking, went to these swanky nightclubs, had the penthouse apartment and the lavish lifestyle. There was also that sexual attraction. It's really strong, that chemistry between them. It might have been really powerful enough for her not to be able to say no. She knew in her heart this was not the type of guy she wanted to be with. And thankfully, she had a new man in her life, Andre, so she was in a better situation. But both of her friends, Dana and Tiffany, confirmed that even though Nyla was angry and felt disrespected, she was determined to learn everything about him. It's almost like you want to add insult to injury for some reason. Not that you want to punish yourself, but it just piques your interest. One thing she was really upset about, like I mentioned in the email, was that he was flirting with her friends. Tiffany admitted that she had to turn down his advances all the time. Now, even though I'm telling you this like it's happening really fast, all of this information gathering by police was happening over weeks, if not months. They wanted to find out and hone in on what Reginald was doing on the 18th. His story is that he woke up around 11 a.m. and he went to various places in Chicago, a fishery, a county building, an auto parts store. He was there around 4 o'clock just taking care of an outstanding invoice. Then he left, and he had to meet with a contractor that he had hired to renovate his condo, but the contractor never showed up. Then between about 6 and 10 p.m., he was out shopping with his friends Hugh and Castra. They picked him up at his condo. According to him, they came by and picked him up from his condo and went to Target on Roosevelt Road. They were there to buy a gift from a baby registry. After they were finished, they just drove him home, and then he went out for the evening. First, he met up with a woman named Joy. Then he met up with a girl named Lindsay, and she's the one that ends up spending the night at his condo. To investigators, Reginald didn't seem like a guy that was necessarily hiding anything. As a matter of fact, he was telling them above and beyond what they were asking. We've seen this before. He's going all out. He's letting them know every detail, who he was with, their first names, their last names. He didn't seem to be hiding anything. He gave all the phone numbers to the police and said go ahead and reach out to these people. And that's exactly what they did. They wanted to track down this couple, Hugh and Castra Eccles. But I do want to shift our focus back to Dana for a moment. There is important information that starts to come out in relation to Reginald coming from Dana. She said that the messages she wanted the police to hear came from him, and he was threatening her and yelling at her, telling her to stay out of his life and his business. Police wanted to know why. Why would she still be in his life, in his business? What led him to leave these messages? Were they out of the blue? Why was he angry? Dana explains that in her anger, Nyla decided she was going to start letting people know that Reginald was not a very good guy. He wasn't who he was pretending to be. She was determined to let other women know what happened to her and what he might do to them. She might have thought that this was something valiant, or maybe she was just doing it out of spite. We don't know. What we do know is that she was able to track down his girlfriend, Ina, the one that was pregnant with his baby, and that started a twerk storm. Ina had just given birth, and here Nyla was telling her that she was having sex with Reginald the whole time. Ina is shocked. She's got this little baby at home. She thinks she's dating this amazing guy. They're looking for a property together to start a new life, and now she's finding out that he's been with this other woman the whole time. However, she believed Nyla because she had so much evidence. They continued talking and sharing information, and the more they shared with each other, the more livid they both became. Ina let Nyla in on something else. Reginald was actually supposed to be paying child support for his 2 other kids, but he wasn't. He also got physical with her. Everything was starting to unravel, and Nyla couldn't believe it. She was actually kind of lucky that she didn't stay with him, that she uncovered these things before she got deeper and deeper into that relationship. She let him go, and it seemed like things were over. She didn't have to worry about it anymore. She got everything off her chest and let the other girlfriend know. But then, in August of 2007, just a month later, she finds out that one of her colleagues is dating him, and it set her off. Was this on purpose? Was it to rub it in her face? Did he go seek out one of her colleagues? It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that now Nyla was going to let this woman know that he was manipulating her. I don't know exactly what she told this woman. It might have been about his criminal record. And we really haven't talked about his criminal record, and it's important I let you in on exactly what it consisted of. It's a little more intense than, oh, I got pulled over for speeding, or I was drunk in public, some of the things we hear about when younger people find themselves in a bad situation. This was a little different. But before I go into that, I always wonder, is this the right thing to do? And what I mean by that is I think to myself, is it my place to say something? Every relationship is so different. I'm not saying this is a good guy, and I'm not saying that he wasn't doing anything wrong. All I'm saying is I just personally ask myself whether or not I should tell this to someone else. Maybe he's not going to do the same thing in every relationship, but the past seems to repeat itself. In this case, we're talking about a man who had 8 felony convictions and 3 misdemeanor convictions. Car theft, physical altercations, orders of protection from women. It was intense, and his record dated all the way back to the 90s. He had punched a gas station attendant, he'd threatened police officers, and once the cops got a copy of his criminal record, they thought it was a pretty bad sign considering Nyla went missing. And now all these things are coming to the surface. It's been confirmed she had a major problem with him, and she was trying to go tell other people about what was happening. One friend says Reginald was pissed. He was really upset that she was going around telling people that he's a cheater and that he wasn't who he said he was. As the police are sifting through all of these emails, they see one from September 6th. This was an email that someone sent to Nyla, one of her friends. It was an article about Reginald. I don't know if they were trying to stir things up with her again, I'm not sure. But it's from the Chicago Sun-Times. Nyla reads it and decides to forward this article to Dana and Tiffany. That's how we know about everything that transpired. Tiffany told the police that Nyla had blind copied, so she BCC'd the forwarded email to Reginald and wrote in the body, "This is ridiculous." The article explained that Reginald was arrested on drugs and weapons charges and for threatening a Highland Park police officer who was investigating him for stealing cars. While he was alone for just a moment in this federal building, the skinny pops slipped out of handcuffs and escaped. While he was on the run, he called the FBI and was bragging to them that they'll never catch him, kind of like, catch me if you can. Finally, 2 weeks later, agents found him hiding under a bush and arrested him. That's what started all of these hateful messages going back and forth over the next few weeks, and this was just a couple weeks before Nyla went missing. Now he's really looking like a suspect. Warning: adult content. I don't know if you're watching this around a kid, but language is going to be a little bit explicit. The first heated communication starts off with a voice message. He calls her, and she doesn't answer, so he decides to go off on her in the voice message. He talks about how he's so rich and he'll always be surrounded by these hot women and all the lavish things, and he'll always be living the life. He says she is just so hung up on him, desperate and angry, and that she won't stop with all the stuff she's doing. And now he knows he's never gonna with her again. He said she was bitter and venomous, and she doesn't deserve the things that he has. He tells her to forget about him and stop digging in his business and leave him alone. He also responded to the forwarded email with the article in it, and he copied Tiffany and Dana among other people, defending himself once again and repeating his request not to be dragged into whatever drama was going on with Nyla. The subject line for the forwarded email said, "I'm rich, so that don't even matter." In that email, he wrote how it was just so sad that she was so caught up in him and mad that he would no longer take her calls or come over and her anymore. He said, "Don't be upset. You give okay head and your ass is kind of tight, so you should be able to find a decent man in no time. Just do yourself a favor and get a lift for those saggy ass breasts." Then he warned her to stop testing him or trying to figure out his next move or who he's with. He ended with, "The article didn't even embarrass him at all. It just made her look bitter and desperate. And if she kept talking and sending articles, he would respond by passing around copies of the video they made that shows his dick in her mouth." Instead of ignoring this message, Nyla decides to write back. She was the type of person who really didn't take crap from anyone, so she told him he was being dramatic and that he was clearly crazy. She also wanted to know how he got all of her friends' email addresses, and she said, "Do not contact Dana or Tiffany or her ever again. They were all sick and have had enough of his obsessive calling and his behavior." Now Reginald calls her on her phone again. Dana is on the other line. She tells Dana to hold on, and she takes his call. When she returned to talk to Dana, that's when she told her she was scared. That's when she gave Dana the information about her username and her password to both her voicemail and her email, in case anything happened to her. Dana said that over the next few days, they talked and texted about this situation all the time. Nyla told her that she was becoming even more afraid that he was going to retaliate in some kind of way. Now, remember that she's sharing information with Ina, and Ina lets her know that she's confronted Reginald and that he is really not happy. Now he's surrounded by all this drama with women. Everyone's finding things out. People know he's a two-timer and he has a criminal past. Both of the women decide that they want to file orders of protection against him. Instead of just doing it, Nyla decides to let Reginald know that she's going to do it. So she emailed him that she was going to file a police report seeking an order of protection. And she said, "Don't come anywhere near me, because if you do, you'll be back in jail. I promise you're crazy, you hit women, you're a bully, and you're extremely dangerous, but you won't bully me. You're messing with the wrong woman." These emails and voice messages and phone calls went back and forth, but then they finally stopped around September 11th. That was when Nyla spent those few days with Andre in Wisconsin. When she came back, she told Tiffany that she was serious about seeking a restraining order against him. She was afraid, and she also emailed Ina and told her they should share information so that they could file a similar order. That same day, Nyla told her friend Devin Carter that Reginald threatened to kill her. She even said, "If something happens to me, he did it." And this was just on September 17th, a day before Nyla goes missing. What was this about? What did he say? Well, it turns out he sent her a voicemail that Dana could no longer find. The one that Dana really wanted to give to police, because all this other stuff, it doesn't prove anything. It proves he's a cheater, that he has a criminal past, and he treats women really badly, but it doesn't have any real threats directly toward Nyla, other than to just stop testing him. Dana insists there was a voicemail where he threatened to erase her, and that was why she decided to file the protective order. That was a threat saying, "You're going to erase someone, it means you're going to make them disappear." And then she disappeared. But you may be wondering about all these other women. The past seems to repeat itself, and he hasn't harmed any of these other women and taken their lives. So did he really do anything to Nyla? Well, it's time to dig into that situation real quick. Police interview Natalia, his ex-wife, and sure enough, she admits he had gotten physical with her. They lived together in a small apartment in Naperville, and there were several instances where he had harmed her. They got into an argument one time when they were driving on the freeway, and they had their 4-year-old daughter in the back seat. Natalia got hit in her face and in her right eye. She tried to pull over and she was crying and screaming, and he just apologized. She was super swollen. She had to miss work and school and wear sunglasses. She didn't tell anyone because she was afraid he was on parole, and at that time she didn't want to get him in trouble. Then in the summer of 2005, she was pushed onto a bed. A pillow was put over her face and pushed down until she couldn't breathe. She was finally able to break free because her daughter came into the room and she told her to call 911. But Reginald said to her he could have done a lot to her before they ever arrived. These threats were serious. Then later in 2005, he put his hands around her neck. He only stopped because once again their daughter came into the room. If she hadn't, Natalia might not be here. By December 2005, the month that they had their daughter, Reginald finally moved out of the apartment in Naperville, and then he was living in Chicago. But that didn't end the suffering, because one time he grabbed her by the arm and threw her to the floor. She was once again too afraid to file a report. By January of 2006, she filed for divorce, and he was enraged. She got hit in the head and it was bad. She even bled. He wouldn't take her to the emergency room because he knew he would get in trouble and possibly arrested. He just drove her by a nearby hospital and dropped her off and left. After that, they finally went their separate ways, and she settled into a new townhouse. But she still let him have contact with their daughters, and she had just seen him on Mother's Day in May. That didn't go well because they got into an argument. They yelled at each other every single time they had to talk or exchange their children. It was a mess. On Mother's Day, she had to call the police, but he grabbed the phone and he drove off with it. A couple weeks later, he shows up without being invited, gets in her face again. She calls the police and she's screaming, but he just keeps taunting her and saying, "Go ahead, I'm rich. I have all the money to bail myself out." He grabs the phone out of her hand, drives away with her phone, and her arm was left injured. That time, she gets a neighbor's phone, calls the police, and files an order of protection. That's the day their divorce was set into motion, but she didn't put any of that in the divorce petition, so none of it was on his record. In March 2006, Aina starts dating him. She knew nothing about him getting physical with Natalia. On September 8th, while he's exchanging these communications with Nyla, and he's really upset, he's at Aina's parents' house asking them for money. What is that all about? He's supposed to be this rich guy with all this money and designer outfits. Of course, I'm gonna tell you all the details, but he and Aina got into an argument. It was scary because he was holding Ava, who was only 3 months old. And guess what? He starts putting his hands around Aina's neck. The only reason he stopped is because Aina's mother came in and tried breaking down a glass door. He then grabbed Ava and left the house. When Aina tried to follow him because she was afraid for her daughter, he pushed her down a flight of stairs and drove off. When he came back, he started arguing with her mother. Thank goodness nothing happened to Ava. Aina was upstairs in a closet hiding. The next day, he comes back and he's kicking and screaming, kicking the back door in, and tells her he's losing his patience. We remove him from the property, and then 3 days later, she tried to file a protective order, but she went to the wrong courthouse. She eventually did get that order on September 18th, the exact same day Nyla disappeared. And that's also the same day that Aina initially got in touch with Natalia. That's right, his ex-wife. So now his ex-wife and his current girlfriend, who both share children with him, just got in touch with each other on the 18th. It sounds very, very suspicious. Knowing all of this, he is definitely the #1 suspect, but he has an alibi. He was at Target, and he says he was with those other women, and they corroborated his story. We're going to hear more about his Target trip and what his friends had to say, but I have to go back because we left off on September 18th. Again, all this time, the cops are still looking for Nyla. I told you there was someone very close to this case, Calvin. And we left off with him and his colleague deciding to go out on their own and look for Nyla. At 4 o'clock in the morning on the 27th, they got their flashlights and walked right into the wooded area. There was just something about that area. It kept bothering Calvin. He just had a gut feeling. After looking around, his partner saw something hanging from a tree. They practically lit up in the darkness because they were white and contrasted against the dark sky when the flashlight would shine towards them in the dark. They knew they were onto something. I can't help but think that they were placed there on purpose, like breadcrumbs, Nyla leaving behind clues to her whereabouts. As they kept going, they were crossing into the adjacent parking lot near the preserve, a parking lot of a rundown video store that I mentioned. They were approximately 20 feet from the edge of that lot and directly in front of the preserve. This was half a mile away from where they found Nyla's car. Calvin saw this section of grassy weeds that came up to his waist. He could tell that there was almost a perfect path through the grass. He started to follow it. He only got about 5 or 6 steps in, and that's when he saw something. It just didn't look right to him. As Calvin got closer, his worst fears were realized because when he looked down, he realized that he was looking at human remains. He was completely shocked. He knew what he was seeing, but he just kept thinking, how do I know it's her? In all likelihood, it was her. Who else would it be? It wouldn't just be another random person. But he didn't want to think that was true. It couldn't be true because how could they have missed this? The cops were focusing more on the lagoon and not really in this other area behind the video store. This was 9 days after she had gone missing, and now everyone's fears had come true. This wasn't the body of someone who had just died. It was decomposed. It couldn't be identified. I can't go into full detail, and you know why. A lot of you really wouldn't want me to anyway, because it just sticks with you. They knew it was the body of a woman. She wasn't clothed and was only partially buried in a shallow grave. They ended up needing dental records to identify the remains. A doctor named Dr. Crowns was the pathologist who performed the autopsy. The remains were partially mummified and skeletonized, and they estimated that she had passed away 8 to 12 days earlier, sometime between September 16th and 20th. It was ruled a homicide. The night before, they got the horrible news. The family had gotten together and surrounded Nyla's mother and father. For 9 days, they had continued to believe that Nyla was going to come back alive. That night, her uncle Dwayne Johnson said that he was just pacing back and forth, just waiting to find out if the body they found was Nyla's. They just kept thinking maybe it's not. They still hadn't gotten word by 10:30 that morning, so they really thought maybe it's not her. 11:30 rolled around and then it was noon. But then the call came in at 12:30, and that's when everything came crashing down. Her uncle said that when the call came in and you hear it, it's like, God, no, not Nyla. Everyone cared about this family. They were rallying around them, giving them support. John, Nyla's younger brother, was in high school and was also holding out hope. All of his classmates just surrounded him, his fellow students and people that didn't even know him that well. They were all attending the prayer vigils and showing concern for Nyla. He still went to school that day, and everyone gathered together around this flagpole to support him and pray for him and his family. But all of that hope was completely shattered. Sadly, the dental records did confirm that the identity of the remains was that of Nyla Franklin. But there was a lack of injury. There wasn't anything that could be observed on the outside. So the doctors concluded that the cause of death was asphyxiation, which could have been done in a variety of ways. I know you can imagine all of those ways: an item, plastic bag, pillow, something that would obviously cause someone not to be able to breathe. Now they're trying to find someone who committed a homicide. They're no longer looking for Nyla, and of course, her family is completely torn apart. How could you ever think that something like this was going to happen to the person you love? Someone close to you, someone you just spoke to. Her family wants answers. As soon as the sun came up, the police were on the scene. They were blocking everything off. They didn't want anyone in that area. There were all kinds of people coming up on the scene: friends, relatives, media, and a bunch of people who just wanted to take photos. This location was Wentworth Woods Forest Preserve. It's on the north side of this road right here. There were officials from Calumet City, Chicago's Cook County Sheriff's Office, Cook County Forest Preserve Police Department, and the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office. A spokesperson for the family said this: "Please continue to keep us in your thoughts and prayers during this sorrowful time. As we move forward, the family asks that you respect this time of mourning as they plan the celebration of Nyla Franklin's life. She will be greatly missed by all of the family." They also express their thankfulness for everyone's efforts in searching and praying. On October 3rd, still not knowing exactly what happened to Nyla, all of her friends and family gathered for her funeral. More than 1,000 people showed up at the Trinity United Church of Christ on 400 West 95th Street. Nyla just couldn't have known how many people she was going to impact. The search was still on to figure out who did this to her. They went back over all the clues and found something. Remember that Remy Martin card they found in the trunk, and then another one in the parking lot? Well, While they were interviewing people, they found out about Kimberly Nash, a woman Reginald had been seeing at the time. She was a marketing manager for Remy Martin. Now things are heating back up, because what would her business card be doing in Nyla's trunk, as well as where the Eli Lilly boxes were found? Obviously, there's some kind of connection between Reginald and Nyla's death. This is when the police decide they're going to get a search warrant. Now they had this connection and probable cause. Something from his condo was at the scene where they found her body. Detectives go there, and right when they get there, they notice his front door is extremely damaged. It looks like it had been kicked in. That was strange. It did look like there had been some foul play, but they found out there was a reason his door was like that, and it had nothing to do with Nyla. A few weeks ago, the Cook County Sheriff's Department had actually tried to force it open because they were attempting to evict him. This was 2007. A lot of people were falling behind on their bills and mortgages. This was when the whole real estate market was collapsing. Reginald had money issues, even though he was strutting around like he was some kind of baller, wearing all the designer brands. His whole closet was full of designer clothing and Gucci shoes. But guess what? He didn't even have a bed to sleep on. He was literally sleeping on a mattress, with no furniture in his entire condo, not even anything to cook on in his kitchen. You know why? Because someone like him didn't care about those things. The things that were important were eating at fancy restaurants and driving nice cars. This was also a reason why I bet Nyla thought there was something suspicious about him. Something wasn't right. If she had ever been to his condo, which I'm guessing she had, she would probably be thinking, "If you're rich, where's your bed? What's going on? You're an adult." But there was something in his condo that was significant. They found an iPod, and when they ran the serial number, it was confirmed that the original owner was Nyla. Oddly, the device was named Reginald. It used to be named Nyla. Shortly after midnight on September 19th, someone had connected the iPod to iTunes, and what did they do? They changed the name. A brand new iTunes file had been created and the old database was deleted. Why would he have her iPod? Why would he be changing the name just the next day after she went missing? While they're collecting things from his condo, they're also confronting him about the voice messages. They wanted to know why he was leaving messages like that, and whether he had anything to do with her death. They show him the emails. They have everything on him. He admits, "Yeah, I was angry. It wasn't cool that she was going around town spreading my business around." So they said, "Oh, okay, well, you weren't really happy about it." And he's like, "Who would be?" They reply to him and say, "Yeah, but we heard that you threatened to erase her." This is when Reginald got a little bit angry because he said, "No, I have sisters. I would never say that." And he insisted he's a good guy. But we know otherwise. We know his criminal past. He had just gotten out of prison 2 years before this. Then the police confronted him with something else, his MySpace page. They found some really weird posts that he made right after Nyla's body was discovered. He had all these public pleas about how he was innocent and had nothing to do with it. He was acting like he was the victim. He even went to the media, telling them his story and denying he had anything to do with Nyla's death. His exact words were, "It's an unfortunate situation, but it doesn't mean I should be run through the ringer. I had nothing to do with it." Something you have to understand is that this was November going into December, and no murder charges had been filed yet. No one had been arrested. Reginald was in Cook County Jail because he had violated one of those protective orders. At the same time, he was charged with aggravated battery for hitting a deputy. As far as Nyla's case was concerned, there was a lot of evidence pointing towards Reginald, but it was all circumstantial. There was no physical evidence connecting him to the crime. They still weren't even sure exactly what happened to her or where she was killed. Just because her body was found where it was, doesn't mean that's where it happened. Besides, it wasn't his business cards that were found, it was someone else's. Sure, they were in his condo, but so was Kimberly Nash, and so was Nyla. Did Nyla take them and put them in her trunk, maybe to look into this Kimberly Nash woman? It wasn't until December that Reginald's alibi was thoroughly investigated. There was so much going on in this case. I know it seems like a lot of time has passed, but with everything they had to uncover, interviewing all those people, her family members, her friends, making all these stories make sense and connecting all the dots. Sure, we can look back and think there's an easy line of evidence from A to Z leaning towards him being a suspect, but that's not really how it works. At this point, they're doing an interview with his alibi witnesses, the couple that he said he went to Target with. They're both in for questioning. Since Reginald had already given them information about which Target location they were at, the police proactively went and gathered the surveillance videos. Sure enough, they do see his friends there. The couple backed up everything Reginald said, that they were at Target together on the evening of the 18th, then dropped him off at his condo. But the police came in and confronted them with the surveillance video. They said, "Yeah, we see you and your wife here, but where's Reginald? Why didn't the cameras pick him up?" You can see, I'm putting this on the screen. Here's a screenshot. We all know if you're in a store like Target, you cannot avoid being picked up by surveillance cameras. So what's going on? At that point, they bring Hugh's wife into another interview room and say, "Listen, this is a murder investigation." They tell both of them that they think Reginald might be involved and they need to start telling the truth. Not only that, the police had some other evidence that could actually implicate them in this crime. They let them know they had phone records, so they better start telling the truth or they'll be arrested. That's when Hugh immediately changed his tune. He said, "Yeah, I went to Target with my wife. We were there to print out a registry for a baby shower. When we were shopping around at about 7:45, that's when Reginald called. He said he was stranded and needed a ride home. He gave Hugh directions. Take the I-94 to the 159th Street exit and get off and meet me at the first gas station across from where the Indiana state line is." Wow, Reginald just happened to be across the Indiana state line. Isn't that where they found Nyla's vehicle? When they finally saw him, he was coming from behind the gas station as if he were hiding, and then he got into their car. The police were able to confirm this with surveillance video from the gas station. Then Hugh was begging the police to believe him that this was the only time he was with Reginald that night. His wife corroborated the story but added that when Reginald said he was stranded in Hammond, it was because he got into an argument with his uncle. And it is true, his uncle lived in that area. As a matter of fact, this is his house. She also said that when they picked him up, there wasn't anything suspicious about him. He didn't have any marks on him, and his clothes were not disheveled. There was no dirt on him, and he looked fine. But the cops have something else. Since Reginald was in jail, they had a recording of his last conversation with Hugh right before Hugh was supposed to be interviewed by police. He said, "Reginald called you 3 times. What was that about?" Reginald's exact words were, "The baby registry does a lot." I'm assuming that means it would place them there because they have to print it out and there would be a record of it. But this is getting crazy, and things are really starting to fall apart. Now the police had to check with every alibi witness. They got in touch with a contractor that Reginald was supposed to meet on the afternoon of the 18th, who was remodeling his condo. Well, that never happened. The contractor said yes, he started to remodel the condo, but then Reginald stopped paying him, and the initial $5,000 installment check had bounced. Every single time this contractor tried to collect his money, Reginald wouldn't pick up his phone, so he never got paid. Remember that woman, Nancy, who owned the property in University Village, the same place where Nyla lived? She had told police that Reginald did come visit her property in September, but she didn't remember the dates. Well, apparently there was a friend who was part of his alibi witness, a friend that he had recently reconnected with because he was mentoring him in real estate investment. The day of the 18th, this friend, Aaron, was driving Reginald around. They met up for breakfast, then he took him back home, and then he picked him up again at 10:30 a.m. They drove around to different places. He went into a car dealership to do some business, and then around noon, they went by University Village to see Nancy's property. This was the day that Nyla went missing. He's at her complex. Aaron says that Reginald got out of his car and said he would be right back. He was just going to go check on the property. Well, he left Aaron waiting for 45 minutes, so what was he doing? Was he with Nancy looking at her property from noon to almost 1 o'clock? Where was he in that building? Coincidentally, somewhere around the same time, Nyla called her work and decided to take a personal day for the rest of the day. They spoke to her. They know it was her. So she just happened to take a personal day the exact same day and time that Reginald was in her building. Then Aaron says they left that area and drove to Gold Coast Auto Body Shop, then to a Bentley dealership. Oh, by the way, remember the white Bentley, the $225,000 Bentley that he kept bragging about and flashing around? Probably why he was getting so many girls in the first place, acting like he's this real estate mogul. Well, that was actually another one of his manipulations. He had actually tricked someone into buying it for him and promised to pay them back, but the check bounced. Oh my God, he was just basically manipulating everyone, taking advantage of so many people with his charm and his charisma, just like he did with Nyla. Aaron says he drove him to a couple more businesses and then back to his condo at 6 p.m. to me. So if his alibi is completely wrecked, what was he really doing? Well, that is where CSL, cell site location information, comes in. It will reveal his whereabouts. CSL stands for cell site location information for phones. Nyla's phone, Reginald's phone, and Hugh's phone. We already know that they found evidence that Nyla's phone had been used and bounced off towers in Hammond, linking her to her car location and where the body was eventually found. So the CSL information on the phones shows where the phones are moving, because it's where the signal is bouncing off which tower. The biggest gap of time in this story is when he was actually at Nyla's building for 45 minutes. Now, I am not going to go into every place that each phone involved was at and which time, but I am going to tell you the most important places where the phones pinged. Nyla's phone was present at the vicinity of her condo in the morning. However, Reginald's phone is in precisely the same exact location when her voicemail was accessed at 1:21 p.m. and again at 1:28 p.m., 4 minutes the first time, 6.5 minutes the second time. Is that when some of the voicemail messages were deleted? Around the time that Andre was leaving work at 4 p.m. and was calling Nyla's phone, and she texted back that she couldn't pick up because she was at dinner. Well, at that point, her phone and Reginald's phone were both moving together toward Reginald's condo between 6 o'clock and 7:30 p.m. There is no activity coming from Nyla's phone, most likely because it was shut off. But Reginald's phone was picked up near Nyla's condo between 6:24 p.m. and 6:49 p.m. and then started traveling south on I-94. Just like Hugh said, a call came into his phone from Reginald around 7:10, and that phone call bounced off a tower right near Target. But when he called a second time, the tower that Reginald's phone bounced off was none other than where the pharmaceutical boxes were located, in that parking lot of the River Oaks golf course, and Nyla's phone was in the exact same area. Then between 8:15 and 8:19 p.m., Reginald and Nyla's phone were in the exact same area where her body was found. Around 8:39 p.m., Hugh's phone is traveling toward where Nyla's car was found. Remember, he came to pick up Reginald from his uncle's house, which was just a couple of blocks away. Then all three phones are heading back toward Reginald's condo around 10 o'clock. When Reginald's phone and Nyla's phone were near his condo, that's when the 911 calls were placed. After that, there was no more activity on Nyla's phone. However, Reginald's phone was still making calls. His phone was near North Loop, which was downtown near his condo. That's consistent with Joy's account of that night. She said that they went out, and then surveillance footage does show him coming in with the other woman, showing up and pulling up into the garage and walking into his condo lobby right before midnight. So, piecing all this together, the police finally had enough to charge him. They interviewed him. He's adamant that he is not involved, and he is so confident that he sounds believable. But then he starts acting really strange. He has always maintained his innocence. However, there were eyewitnesses who actually saw him at Nyla's condo. Not only that, they pulled surveillance from her condo, and in fact, he's on camera, and it's chilling. Listen to this. In the days leading up to her disappearance, neighbors and security guards in her building saw Reginald lurking. This is when police believe that he was actually plotting and premeditating her demise. On the morning of September 16th, just a couple of days before she went missing, a resident named Sterling Gunn, which is an interesting name, saw Reginald's Bentley in the parking garage. He noticed that the parking garage was partially closed. Reginald saw this man and said, "Oh, should I move my car?" The guy said, "Nah," but when he looked up again, he saw Reginald spying on him from a different portion of the parking lot, which was really strange. The garage door seemed like it was broken. The next morning, another resident named Sheila Gregory saw Reginald walking down the hallway on the interior of the building. He didn't look like he was coming from anywhere specific, and security footage shows him walking out of the elevator into the parking garage. Lisa Hudson, who was a security guard, went to the parking garage after someone reported that the door wouldn't close. She saw Reginald pacing around and talking on his phone. Later, she and another guard returned to investigate a report of a suspicious person, and they found Reginald in a stairwell. They asked him what he was doing there, and he said he was smoking, but he didn't have a cigarette and it didn't smell like smoke. He also lied to the security guards. He said his name was Johnson from Unit 403, but the guards did not believe him and they called the police. That's when he drove away in his Bentley. They searched the garage and found that the locking mechanism on the door had been tampered with. Surveillance footage from the building showed Nyla entering the garage in her car shortly before noon on September 18th. She parked her car, went up to her condo, and then returned to the parking garage with Reginald around 1 p.m. The camera shows Nyla walking in front of him, and then she seems to quickly turn her head and look back at him. That was the last time that she was ever confirmed to be alive. It doesn't seem right, she doesn't seem happy. And the part we don't see, but that was in a report I read, was that it looked like he was pulling her inside, that she was being forced by Reginald to go with him against her will. It's pretty obvious that he was the last person that was with Nyla that day. He had the opportunity, the time, and the accessibility to commit this crime. When Aaron dropped him off and waited for him for 45 minutes, that is when that footage shows them getting in the elevator together and going to that parking garage. That was probably where Nyla was killed, in her own car. Reginald forced her in there, put his hands around her neck, and left her there. Then he came back to drive her car to Hammond and leave it there on the side of the road, and then asked his friend for a ride home. It all corroborated with the cell phone towers. Everything connected to what the cell phone records showed. Because remember, at 6:24, Nyla's phone was turned off, and Reginald's phone was at her condo right after that. Both phones started traveling towards Hammond. I guarantee you cannot bring me getting off of the elevators. He's pretty much a con man. That's what it looks like, and that's what Nyla's family and friends believed as well. Now that they had all this evidence, they knew that they were finally going to get justice for their loved one, but that's not exactly what happened. It took 9 years. 9 years, almost a decade, from when Nyla disappeared because this man was a master manipulator. All the qualities, good-looking, conniving, living a double life. Reginald had gotten so many people to believe in him, and he's done it again and again. He has just become this master at manipulation, not only with people, but with the criminal justice system. He was able to delay this trial that long. He played every game. He would hire attorneys and then fire attorneys. When that happens, everything has to start over. There's a whole new process. At one point, he tells the court he's just going to represent himself, and then he changes his mind. This was so hard on Nyla's family. They just wanted justice. They wanted to see him held accountable. They were heartbroken, and worse yet, her father Lee had passed away while this trial was in limbo for 4 years at the time he passed away. Her mom said he died because of this trial, because he lost his daughter. He stopped eating, and he became sick. His health just went downward from there. He died from a broken heart. This family lost so much. The January after Nyla passed away, the family did get together. They went to her condo to pack up some of her things. It was the first time they had been there since she passed away. Leah remembers walking in and smelling Nyla's perfume, and she just envisioned her walking out at any moment to greet them, running up and saying hello. I found this to be so touching. It's one of my favorite things that I read. Just a little bit of happiness in this really sad case that's not even over yet. They went to her condo, they did things for her, they cleaned up, did her dishes, made her bed. I can't even imagine just looking around. It was like she was just there. Everything was just the way that she left it. There was even a cup that she used for her morning coffee still on the countertop. When people do these terrible things to their victims, they don't just take away that person's life, they take away the family's life because they take away the joy and the future. I think with all the people that he tried to fool in his life, the biggest person he was trying to fool was himself. This man had 20 arrests in 4 counties and 8 convictions spanning more than a decade. He had threatened to kill a Highland Park police detective and his family. You're gonna hear from that man now. He threatened me I would see the end of his .45, that he would kill me, that he would kidnap my family, kill my family. I would never be safe. In 2003, he pled guilty to hitting a correctional officer in the eye. The next year, in 2004, he called his ex-girlfriend's family numerous times with threats. By March 5, 2008, he was being charged officially with Nyla's murder, and prosecutors were seeking the death penalty. There were 16 counts against him, the highest being for first-degree murder. This case finally went to trial in 2015, and by then, the death penalty had been overturned in the state. When prosecutors were gathering even more evidence, they found out that the abandoned video store, remember that, was actually owned by Reginald's brother-in-law, Mohammed al-Sheikh. He had taken Nyla there shortly after his brother-in-law purchased that property. Wow, that's good. It puts just another nail into Reginald's coffin. The case went to trial in November of 2015, and the sentencing was in 2016. Here's the prosecutor talking at the hearing. It was so hard to hear what her family had to say. The nightmare still haunts me, with her screaming, moaning, and reaching out, begging for her life. But none of us were there to save her. None of us were there to hear her cries. There were 2 deaths as a result of this crime, Nyla and her father. He died as a result of this. He stopped eating, and his health declined. There were a lot of witnesses for the prosecution. Police officers that had handled other cases he was involved in, like this one. When they asked him how bad Reginald was, this was his point of view. County Jail Chief Terry Williams testified that Potts had committed more than 200 violations while in custody, including setting a fire in his cell and sabotaging plumbing. He was asked where Potts ranked among the worst inmates in his career. He's gotta be top 10. His ex-girlfriends testified, his ex-wife, anyone who knew him, and they didn't have nice things to say. Even Reginald's dad, Reginald Potts Sr., spoke at the sentencing, trying to get his sentence reduced. He talked about how Reginald had a broken home and about his upbringing, but none of those things mattered. Oh, and Reginald spoke at his sentencing as well. Are you ready to hear this from the man himself, from the legend in his own mind? Here we go. I'm not a monster. I'm not a monster. I can't ask for forgiveness for something I didn't do. I stand before you and say that I am innocent. I did not murder Nyla, period. Every channel you look at, a man murders his ex-girlfriend because he broke up with her. A man murders his ex-girlfriend after stalking her. There is nothing in this case that suggests that I stalked Nyla Franklin. I feel something's wrong, and I'm going to speak about it. I'm not going to attack anybody. I'm going to speak my mind. Did that not disgust you? It's weird. I didn't like when he said that he can't ask for forgiveness for something he didn't do. No matter what Reginald wanted to say, or how much he wanted to try to convince the jury that he did not have anything to do with Nyla's death, it didn't matter, because it only took them 2 hours to find him guilty. They couldn't be manipulated. I'm going to let the judge tell you exactly what his sentence was. You are a cold, calculating coward of a con man who must be punished. You didn't erase her, Mr. Potts. She lives on in the hearts and minds of all these people. Hereby, I sentence you to spend the rest of your life in the Illinois Department of Corrections without the possibility of parole. You heard the judge. He handed down a life sentence. Today, at the age of 45, he's imprisoned at the medium security Lawrence Correctional Center in Sumner, Illinois. Closing, I want to read you something that I found on Nyla's MySpace page. She had a bunch of photos with her and her friends, smiling and laughing together. She described herself as someone who loved to travel, loved her family, and loved having fun. She said she was extremely opinionated and that her grandmother was her hero. She dreamed of meeting Oprah, Janet Jackson, and Hillary Clinton someday because she thought they were smart and sexy. On her personal website, she wrote, "My friends might call me a busybody. I can never really sit still. I'm always trying to figure out what I should be doing better with my life. I'm sort of a hopeless romantic. I tend to find the romance and beauty in people and in the world around me. Everyone has a story. There's always a lesson to be learned."